I would draw the request.
Email me.
Yes. I'm good, sir. How about yourself? Sharp as a tack. Just look nice. Look real nice.
I didn't know they had a golden.
Pretty good. Hey, Chris, how are you? Can't complain. This is the work I'm doing to try and get them to allow on-site water storage.
Okay.
I'm talking about
Don't need the fire code.
when
Hey, John, leave another one. I've got some.
we don't know. Oh, yeah, we do have cards, so that's a fire. I asked everyone to sign.
No, I
I don't
understand.
even know how the power is, but we'll pass that way. Well, you're welcome to, no, because it's
Haven't maybe somebody about it, pull our well perspective.
I would water it.
That's part of
Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for making the time to be here.
Make sure the power is.
One more meeting.
And that the pipes aren't first.
I'm Karen Farrer, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Malibu.
Mikke Pierson, City Council member. Thank you all for showing up tonight.
Okay, if anyone has not signed in, we would like for you to do that so that we can stay in contact with you. I've got a sign-in sheet here. Maybe I should pass it around if you all don't mind passing that along for anybody who has not yet signed in. Has anyone not signed in?
No.
We'd like to know you were here. Thank you. Okay.
Come on in, folks.
We've got comment cards up here. They're also at the table over there. Would anybody like one? And a pen? Speaker slips, basically. Would you like one? 2, 3, 4? Okay. Don't be shy. That's why we're here.
So the idea tonight is Karen and I, as you know, are head of this ad hoc committee on the fire and recovery and moving forward. And we're here to gather your insights, your stories, your experiences with the goal of being better prepared next time so we don't get run over the way we were run over in the Woolsey fire. So that process for us is going to be a series of public meetings. And also, we're doing a lot of interviews. We have started and we will be interviewing the head of all sorts of agencies, the fire department, all the way up into Sacramento, water district, anybody that really had a hand in how we end up here tonight is also part of what we're doing.
And if I may add, we're also comparing notes with other municipalities. We've had some talks with some that were involved in the Woolsey fire in our area here along the 101 corridor, along with some cities that were not involved in the Woolsey fire, but to compare notes in general with their emergency and disaster preparedness procedures.
It's part of what we're doing too. What would be great, we want you to speak tonight. We're gonna keep it pretty informal. It's a decent sized group, so, you know, I don't think we're gonna start a timer, but we don't wanna have to kind of look at you and do this. So kind of if you can get to the point and go through your story, that would be helpful just because there's a lot of other people. And I'm sure people don't wanna be here all night waiting their turn. But also, please, even if you speak tonight, we urge you to write us. There's a big difference between telling a story verbally and writing it down, even in bullet points. It's part of what I do for a living is I work on communication. So if you get a chance after tonight, bullet point or write out what you told us because it tends to bring up more detail and that can be very helpful. So encourage you to do your best to communicate clearly so that we understand exactly what you're saying, because your ideas are very, very important. We are looking to bring recommendations forward to the city council on best practices for the future that are a fit for Malibu too. There's a lot of science on fire preparedness. There's a lot of science on what's happened in other communities and in other countries. So really, at this point, to be better prepared in the future, not only do we want to bring those best practices in, but we want to make sure it fits for our community, because we're not necessarily like a grass fire in Australia or other places like that. So, Erin, anything else you want to add?
I would like to acknowledge we have Jeremy Wolf here in the audience. He's the representative from State Assemblyman Henry Stern's office, and we're working with Henry as well. We will be, if we have not already, working with the county, the water district, the fire department, the CHP, the sheriffs, Henry Stern's office, Sheila Kuehl, and Gavin Newsom.
Cal Fire.
And beyond if
OES.
need be. So we want to do as thorough a job as possible, and as Mikke said, we need solutions that work for Malibu. We know our community, and we really appreciate everybody being here. So I think I will also mention, there are 2 documents I have here and over there at the table. This one is called The City of Malibu, an Official's Guide to Emergency Management. And this one is the Supplemental Public Safety Commission Agenda Report dated January 7th. If anybody would like a copy, I'm happy to have you have it. They're only 12 pages each. They have a ton of information. I learned a lot. And they do explain the duties of the city and the parameters of the city, and some of the constraints that the city works within. So I don't want to use it as any kind of an excuse, but it does explain the framework, and it's real. It's what we have to comply with. So more information is better, and please take a copy of each if you have not yet.
So for our speakers tonight, we're going to ask you to speak on the mic, so that way it's recorded, so we can actually access it again. And if you could give your name, and that would be great. And like I said, if you would want to follow up with an email to our ad hoc committee email address, or either one of us, doesn't matter. And
Let's give that email address.
let's give that email address. Do we have it memorized? You would think we would know it by heart.
Not right to ourselves.
I sometimes write to myself. Recovery ad hoc at, no, it's at Malibu City. Yeah. Okay, this part we're not good at. Here we go. Recovery ad hoc at malibucity.org. We'll repeat that later. So, do we have?
Are there any other speaker slips that anybody would like to give me now? Okay, or don't worry, you can do it as the meeting unfolds. Recovery ad hoc at malibucity.org.
Okay, let's kick this off. You've heard us speak too much already. Who'd like to tell their story or share their insights? Do I have a brave volunteer to start? Excellent. Please just give us your name and tell us your story.
My name is Scott Tallal, and I was here for the '93 fire, was evacuated from my apartment on Broad Beach, and sat in traffic for 6 hours. I was also evacuated 3 months ago, sat in traffic for 6 hours. It was a big difference between the 2 fires. In 1993, the reason we were forced to stay in the 2 eastbound lanes heading down the coast is that there was a steady stream of fire support coming up from Los Angeles, not just Los Angeles County, but Los Angeles City, Culver City. A lot of the communities in Orange County were coming up the coast into Malibu. This time we had none of that. So if we aren't going to get fire support from the city of Los Angeles or from other communities. I would hope that we look at opening all of the lanes. Secondly, I hope that we would have better communication with the sheriff and with the Los Angeles Police Department to control the intersections, to keep the flow of traffic moving down the coast so that we don't have to sit there in 6 hours, for 6 hours in traffic. Just because we don't control CAL FIRE, just because we don't control LA Sheriff's Office or LAPD, doesn't mean we can't talk to them and ask them to do things that make sense. Second thing I'd like to say is if one more person tells me that this was a fast-moving fire, I may have to scream. I was running a screening at the Malibu Screening Room for the Film Society on Thursday night, November 8th. We stopped the screening right in the middle of the show. And this was a studio-sponsored screening with the director coming and Q&A and everything else. We've never done this before, but we had to announce that communities over the hill were being evacuated under mandatory evacuation. About 20 people in our audience left. We resumed the screening, and I got on the phone to Hans Letz, who runs KBU Radio. And I asked Hans what was happening. He said, it looks really, really bad. He had a reporter by the name of Laura Espinoza on the scene, covering the fire, and he was live from 8 o'clock on. The fire, according to Laura, and I just checked with her about 30 minutes ago, Laura says the fire jumped the 101 around 1:30 in the morning. It traveled 11 miles in almost 12 hours. That's not a fast-moving fire. So I think it's really important when LA County says that they didn't have the resources, that they were trapped, whatever. There was plenty of time to get fire resources here. We stopped our screening at 8:30, told people to go home and prepare. I was on the air with Hans at KBU from 4 o'clock onward. We were giving people preparation notices. The final official notice came through at 7 a.m. and the fire didn't get into our neighborhood for another 5 hours after that. We had plenty of time. So I hope that's considered.
Mikey, should they talk so that he can pick this up?
Well, we have the mic. Thank you, Scott. So, excellent, thank you. We are breaking the fire down. It's pretty obvious with what we're doing into several things. The evacuation is certainly one, and that involves obviously some major communication gaps, clearly. Communication is another one of the easy buckets to look at. My personal experience, 0. Yes, that.
Except on cable.
Which I couldn't get because I had no power and no cell phone. So, excellent, that's a perfect story, and I think that really factors in, and I appreciate you sharing that very much. So yeah, some of these buckets that we're breaking this down to, you perfectly nailed, so that's very helpful, I really appreciate that.
Mikey, Daphne drove north at 10 o'clock without any problem.
We're aware of that, and they're aware the communication said it was closed.
Did you all hear that comment? That, yeah, Daphne drove north at 10 in the morning, which I think a lot of people, if they'd known that was an option, would have obviously taken that.
Eric Meyer left at 12 noon and had no problem going up the coast.
So communication has been clearly identified, and obviously, I think you know the city is hiring an expert on communication. Learned a couple things very early on. I thought, well, why don't we all have sat phones? Didn't know they didn't work in heavy smoke. I had no idea. That was news to me. Cloudy days, the same thing. Fire was so dense in my neighborhood at 12:20, I thought it was 5:30 at night. So that's interesting learning there too. As far as what time across the freeway, that's an interesting point I'll check on. I was watching the news all night because my sister-in-law evacuated from Malibu Lake, and she called us at 2, and it hadn't jumped then to her. So, but either way, it burned down her house. Oh, there she is. Teresa's here. So, what time did it jump the freeway?
It didn't jump the fire at the highway at 1:30. As far as we can tell, the closest is just before 5 a.m.
We had a reporter on the scene who saw it happen at 1:30.
Well, we'll look at that. We'll look at that.
It jumped in multiple places, so all of those answers could be correct.
Right.
Thank you very much. Multiple places. Like I said, I got the good fortune to helicopter the whole site and see where it jumped, and it was, in many ways, it feels like it wasn't worse, to be honest, so.
I have a question, just so we all get a feeling here. How many people stayed? How many evacuated? And I just want to ask, and I'm just going to apologize right now, how many people lost their home? Yeah, we don't ever want to go through this again. So I have a card from Bert Ross, but Bert, I'm going to ask you to read it.
Thanks. I was hospitalized when my class learned how to write, so I can understand my penmanship is such you couldn't read it. I have 2 points. One is, it seems like there's almost an acceptance that the issue of fighting the fire has to be when the fire hits us, meaning it would almost be like if we had an armed invasion from another country, that the entire defense would be when the enemy is walking down the street, you get your guns and you shoot from the balcony. I don't buy the concept that we need to allow fires to come over all of that land. We just had tremendous rains, we're expecting additional rains. Much, if not most of that water goes into the Pacific Ocean. We don't collect it, we don't do what Israel does with water. I can't believe that we can't create a firewall somewhere in between the 101 and here. I'm not saying it's going to be cheap, but if you're interested in the environment, I don't know how well the animals are doing right now. So I think Dan, a fellow named Dan here who has a system for sprinklers, I don't know if that would work, but I'm not saying it would stop every ember, but it would minimize it so dramatically that we would have the resources, that we wouldn't have the catastrophe. So I'm hoping that I remember at a council meeting recently, there was talk, we're going to have other fires. Well, I don't want to accept that. My approach is, we're not going to have more. We're going to stop them from happening. That's number one. Number two, I don't question, and by the way, I understand that we're an independent city with very little power. That's the reality.
Or a contract city.
That 100%. But your job is basically to be the lobbyist for us. We need to put pressure. You folks say, and I believe you, that you very much want us to have the right to rebuild. You've all said it, Reva Feldman said it, the building department has said it, I believe that. But it's not going to mean anything if Sheila Kuehl doesn't step up and say the identical thing, which is, I want the people of Malibu to be able to rebuild. And she's got to be put right in the spotlight. And we want her to say, we want her to turn to the fire department and say, be reasonable. We want the water district. There was an entire, we talked about it just a minute ago before this meeting, of Chris Carradine. I don't know Chris, but what he is saying is that most of us will not be able to rebuild, even if the city says fine, even if the fire department says fine. We need to have Sheila Kuehl and the county supervisors put pressure on the water district. Otherwise, everything we're doing is not just a waste of time, but we're all hiring architects, and to add insult to injury, we're gonna lose tens and tens of thousands of dollars and not get a permit. So I'd like you folks to address those two issues, stopping the fire before it comes down here, because everything is about 20-foot gates and access and turnarounds, and which, you know, for trucks that never, in many cases, didn't show. How do we stop it before it gets here? And secondly, how do we get the people who can make the decisions that get the fire department and the water district to cooperate?
Thank you, Bert. Thank you. So I heard your 2 points. I think the traditional thought with the fire department is they'd stop it at the 101, but I think they all knew that if they didn't, it would just keep burning, and well, that's what happened. So great point there. And number 2, I agree with you. We need help. We need help further up. This fire department issue there's just no way. It can't go the way it's going. It just can't. I'll leave it at that because we have a lot of work to do on that. That has become my number one pressing issue that is just unacceptable. And then the tragic irony of it is, which is clear, imposing that on homes they didn't defend. That's, you know, just, anyhow, unbelievable. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
I
and
don't think he's not saying about the fire department, he's saying the water district.
water district, we obviously,
You gotta
yeah.
hear that, because it's a different issue.
We need infrastructure improvement, and I see Paul Grisanti is in the room, and he might like to say something about that.
I'd love to.
Okay, I think we should do this, because Paul, I think Paul knows more about this than anybody in the room. And Paul is on our Public Safety Commission,
You bet, I'm on Public Works.
Sorry.
Public Works.
That's okay. Karen, thank you so much for being here last night when you heard Reva announce that Sheila Kuehl has announced that the water improvements that serve the area that burned, that they were put on a shelf back in 2017, are now they're gonna go forward with them. So there will be a new water tank up high on Cavallari, one on, I think it was, one in Malibu Park,
Top of Bush, I think.
and then another one at Encinal Canyon. And that will that will allow most of the houses that burned to have good fire flow numbers. The only question is how soon are they gonna be able to get the tanks in existence, and what kind of slack will the fire department give if they know that the work is proceeding and it's gonna happen? So.
What's your opinion, Paul, your faith on that going forward at a pace that we can accept?
Well, one of the things I want to ask at the next city council meeting is, because our planning commission is so busy, I think that when the tanks need to be approved, they should skip the planning commission, come directly to the city council, which is where they would be if somebody appeals them, and just have you guys pronounce on them right there. And I think that would, there are some people on the city council who've been on the planning commission, Mikke.
Heard about that.
Yeah, so I don't see any reason why anybody would be scared that there wouldn't be adequate oversight. And if it can, rather than wait 2 months for a position on the planning commission agenda, for example, I think the city council is showing the willingness to have extra meetings and things like that, and I think that that's something you guys ought to do. And I'm gonna show up and ask you guys to do it 2 weeks from now.
Thank you, that's great.
Thank you.
Appreciate that,
Mike,
Paul.
can I answer that?
Yeah, I was gonna ask Don.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going in any particular order, but as long as we're talking about water, I think Don Schmitz has something to say.
So the question that Paul didn't specifically answer that you asked is how long will that take if they were to pull the trigger right now? So the only one of those water tank and water main infrastructure improvements that's at all down the road in regards to the permit process is the one up in Encinal. Lechuza Highlands, is that? Yeah, Lechuza Highlands. And the neighbors have been working with the city to process the coastal development permit for that tank and water mains for 4 years?
4 years.
So we're hopeful that we can get the last aspects done with the planning department and get this in front of the city, which would make it the first shovel-ready project to be done for that list and for the affected areas from the fire. If once the city issues that coastal development permit, which represents the discretionary entitlement for that, then the water district has to do the engineering for that, the actual working drawings, if you will. They estimate that takes about 8 months. It would take about 8 months or so for them to construct it. So if the city was to move faster with the water district on these other areas and able to do the coastal development permit with lightning speed compared to what's been historically the case, that would be about a year probably for the coastal development permit. There's nothing that says it couldn't go faster. So you'd be looking at 3 to 4 years, probably. And as Paul has eloquently testified in previous hearings, they've been accruing a lot of money. They have a war chest where they could build these systems and they could do it right now. And that's why I gave you the handouts and to the members of the audience to pertain towards the alternative standards, because that's a long time for people who lost their homes to sit around and wait. And in that handout, it's got the citations where you can, under the current fire code, provide those alternative standards, and you as a legislative body would have to change that, because right now you have to be above the pressure zone and 2,000 feet away from a water main, which does not help the people whose homes burn down. But you can do that. Also, in the information I gave you, you have the legal ability to do that, to appoint your own fire official to process that. And as you and I have discussed, I think not just for a short-term solution to allow people to rebuild their homes, but for the long-term safety of these communities, if everybody had a 10 or 20,000 gallon water tank on their property, using the Lechuza Highlands as an example again, for the 47 or so properties up in there, that would be over 900,000 gallons worth of water right now. And ultimately, the water district had us design a 300,000 gallon tank up there. That'd be 1.2 million gallons long term. And as we have seen and experienced over and over in these fires, from people fighting the fires, from broken water mains, etc., the municipal tanks go dry. And so if we had a 10 or 20,000 gallon water tank on each and every property and every home, then every home would be guaranteed that, yes, when the fire trucks arrive to fight the spot fires on their individual property, that there would be water to do that job.
Don, wouldn't that be good to have other places besides just there?
Oh, absolutely. That's just a case study. But there's two main aspects that the council might want to consider doing this. First and foremost, for the fire rebuilds, allow them to proceed now, get the coastal development permit exemption to rebuild their house, and have the water storage tank. And I think you're also going to see a lot of folks in the future, just because wanting to have a water storage tank on their property, or if somebody proposes a new project, wants to demo a house and build a new house, I think it'd be wise for us as a community to have part of our development standards that they have a water storage tank.
Don, can you comment on the Little Bush tank that they were at the Planning Commission with in what, 2016?
Yeah, I asked like 5 questions and they never came back.
Well, they're
Bad
ready
about
to
that.
come back now. They claim to be ready to go on that one.
The Planning Commission wasn't real happy with some certain aspects of that particular water tank. And because our codes, which by the way are written by real life human beings and can be changed by real life human beings with new information, we do not have different development standards and permit processes for a municipal water tank than we do for, say, somebody looking to build a house or a store. So because of the height of the water tank and the locations and such, it required variances. And the Planning Commission asked a lot of questions. They had a on-site restroom there, and they didn't like that. And some of the neighbors, by the way, complained about the visual impacts of the water tank that was going to be built there. That was how long ago, Paul? That was
In 2016.
Yeah, so it was
Maybe
a number of years ago. So the water district, and look, the water district engineers, they're not regulatory specialists and experts at public hearings, and they weren't completely prepared to field these questions, but a number of questions was put to them by the Planning Commission. I'm not going to pontificate in regards to the appropriateness of that, taking into account the essential nature of this water storage tank. But the water district said they would come back with more information, and we have not heard anything from them since.
Yeah, I was definitely one of the ones asking questions, more for education, and I was completely caught off guard. They had no ability to answer it, and they disappeared and never came back. So, not sure how that happened. I do want to add, so certainly last night, if anyone was at City Council or listened, we got into a bit of a discussion on water tanks, but we didn't finish it at all, and I really made a point of bringing it back. I'll just admit my bias is that every house should probably not only be allowed to put on water tank, but at some point, depending where you are, particularly be required to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to do it that it's not a visual blight. It can even be underground. There's ways to have auxiliary power to make sure it works. It doesn't, I can tell you from personal experience, it doesn't take a lot of water to save your house. It doesn't take 10,000 gallons. It really doesn't. But beyond that, I think being prepared is more than being prepared for the next fire. The worst incident might be a large earthquake, and then you have the entire water system, the bigger water system down, and if you have a tank, you're able to live in your house and you'll have some water. If you don't, you have no water maybe for weeks, months, I have no idea. So I think living in a rural community, we really need to be prepared what we can do for ourselves to help ourselves, and that's part of what I'm hoping our committee comes up with, those kind of ideas. So, excellent.
I think we're gonna be better served doing the speaker slips the way that we do them at council meetings, and that would be for each of you to put your name on here, and then I will give you the mic, or Mikke will, to read us or tell us your question or statement. Because I'm looking at some of the questions and statements, and I think they're better off coming from the person who wrote them down. So is everybody okay with that? Like public comments? Okay, so Jane Albrecht.
Hi. Thanks, Karen. My contribution to this effort of figuring out how we can prevent this from ever happening again. Certainly I've talked individually to Mikke and Karen about it, but I thought it was time to present it to the community. And I will also ask the ad hoc committee to consider including it in their recommendations. That is, as we've all talked in these last 2 or 3 months about what happened, what went wrong, Bert, your suggestions about having a fire break is a great suggestion. We should do that. Better brush clearance, we should do that. More fire-safe homes, we should do that, and we can do that, and I think we'll do a lot of that. But as I've listened and researched, one thing became apparent. There's a huge elephant in the room that we know about, that the fire department knows about, and we keep overlooking it. And that is, both in LA County and statewide in California, there is a severe, and as we experienced, very dangerous shortage of firefighters and firefighting equipments statewide. From talking to the LA County Fire Department, they have no more firefighters today than they did, I think, 30 years ago, and yet there's a lot more people. Mike, did you have better statistics on that?
The numbers I've been given is that there's actually less equipment available now.
Right, no more firefighters and less equipment, so they transfer them. Looking into what happened, I realized there was statewide. Why is there this shortage? Well, it's not unusual in California, both before we felt the worst effects of climate change and today, to have 2 or 3 major wildfires a year. And it's exactly what happened in the Camp Hill and Woolsey fire. They broke out within 24 hours of each other. And the reason the Woolsey fire wasn't nipped in the bud was because they didn't have enough equipment at 2:35 in the afternoon to put it out. It should have never been more than a spot fire that was put out. The reason they weren't able to control it from the 101 is there wasn't enough people and equipment. Yeah. They asked, I think by the time it got to the 101, they had 45 to 50 fire teams on it. They asked for 45 to 50 teams more. And the answer came back, not available. And that's why they knew when it crossed the 101 at 5 a.m. in the morning, they knew it was going to go all the way to the ocean. And their first obligation was to save people, so they issued the mandatory evacuation order. The second was property, but they knew that they didn't have the equipment to do it. And so no serious property protection. It's not because the fire department didn't want to do it. Most firefighters and the fire chiefs feel terrible when they lose a house. We have some of the most renowned firefighting capabilities in the world in California. It's amazing what they can do in fighting fires and houses. They go all over the world. They went to Hurricane Katrina. They went to the Mexico earthquake in 1985. But isn't it ironic in the last couple of years, or in more than the last couple of years, too often they're not able to protect their own citizens? Well, why is that? It's because We would not send troops into war with not enough fighters and not enough equipment. But in fact, in California, for at least the last 25 years, that's what we've been doing. And so the good news is there's an answer to this. If you need anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 people available to fight a major wildfire, and you can have 3 as we had this time, you've got to be prepared for 4, you're talking about developing a force of anywhere from 15 to 20,000 firefighters. Well, you don't need that full-time year-round, but it is the classic, but you do need to be able to call up on a moment's notice thousands of firefighters that can get there quickly. Not from Riverside, California, to get all the way up to Paradise, California. And you can do that with a classic reserve force. And what I'm proposing is the formation of the California Fire Reserve Corps. It is like the California National Guard, but it is specifically for firefighting and indeed for other emergencies we may have. So the way it would work is you could put it through CAL FIRE. It is something that the state will have to do, but I believe that Malibu could endorse the concept. We've got other endorsements. We'll work on other endorsements. Basically, you'd have up to 20,000 firefighters in units embedded within every community. And with enough firefighters, there would also be a change in strategy. They were in total triage by the time they got to Malibu. That's called defense. With the California Fire Reserve Corps would come a commitment that no community will ever be left defenseless when fighting a major wildfire or emergency natural disaster. So the good news is it won't cost Malibu City a lot of money. The other good news, because it really is a state project, the other good news is we can afford it. Currently, there's $14.5 billion in rainy day reserves in the California budget. And that there's an expected almost $15 million in reserves expected for 2020. It will cost a small fraction of that to start this. And once it's started, as many of you in this room know, it costs the state and county government billions every time an incident like this happens. And these incidents have been happening every year. It will pay for itself year in, year out. And if we do this, if we do the California Fire Reserve Corps, then everything else we do, plus that, will be a game changer. These major conflagrations will no longer be a yearly fact of life for us. If we don't do it, guess what? If you build the most fire-safe home in the world with 100-foot clearances and the best water in the world, and no firefighters show up. We were here in 1983. We were here, I believe, in 1986 and 87. We were here in 2007. We were here in 2018, in 2007. It's going to happen again. So that is what I am trying to raise awareness of, that basically don't overlook the linchpin in this whole process. There's a paper over there, a 2-page paper that describes it, and on our website at the Malibu Democratic Club you can find the full paper.
Thank you very much, Jane. So,
Thank you.
I want to follow up on what Jane said. So,
I have a question, Mike. Can I ask a question?
yeah, absolutely. One sec. Jane, so part of, go ahead.
Pertaining to the labor force,
Yes.
I run a business. Every 2 weeks I get an overtime report of anyone that's, each department, if they have overtime, because I want to have a minimum amount of overtime.
Right.
If I have a pressure on the company, I can then pay overtime, and I have a resource, a pool of people that are willing to work overtime.
Yes.
I don't know how it works in the fire department, but in reading what's happening are we already maxed out on our overtime with the number of firemen we have out there, so there's no additional people we can pull up when we have the emergency?
I think there's part of that. What Fire Chief Williams told me was that men worked for 48 hours straight in the Woolsey fire. So some of what you saw, not all of it, and this not to negate what happened in Corral Canyon, but some of what you saw those fire engines sitting here in front of our fire station with people that had no sleep for 48 hours. They can't keep functioning. It's dangerous. There's more information about that. What I'm hoping, I have to talk to the firefighters union. I believe it's good for them. These are paid positions. These are not, basically they go through 14 weeks training at night or during the day. You'd have to commit to a weekend a month, just like the National Guard, in 2 weeks a year. So it would be additional paid position, and one thing that I say in this paper is their job would be much safer. Every firefighter knows it's dangerous to go into with too few men. But yes, I do believe that there's not enough, and that's one reason for that. I should also mention and Jeremy, you probably know, Jeremy Wolf of Senator Stern's office is kindly here tonight. They have informed me that Governor Newsom, and I was aware of this, wants to spend a whole lot more money this year to make California more fire safe. Jeremy, you know more than I do. My understanding is that it's going to be devoted to beefing up their Forestry Services Division and their California Conservation Corps. I think he's on the right track, but he's not going far enough. If you don't, it's nipping around the edges. If you don't do the California Fire Reserve Corps, it's not going to work. But we can talk about that later. Maybe Jeremy, later you can tell people what's going on in Sacramento.
Thank you so much for sharing that. This is exactly why we're here. I just want to add to it. So Karen and I are working on setting up a day in Sacramento to go talk to Cal Fire, to go talk to Gavin, to go make the rounds on exactly this issue. The other side of it that has Chief Osby's blessing so far is also volunteer brigades in neighborhoods. My neighborhood has one, and we fought the fire successfully. We lost homes, we saved a lot of homes. Corral has a different version. So Chief Osby has already endorsed that because I think he understands he may not be able to get here with fire people because obviously that's already happened. So those are some of the ideas we're bringing forward. My neighborhood, which is Malibu West, is doing it either way. But once again, it's not just for fire. It's to be ready for earthquake. It's to be ready for, well, mud flows, which we already have. We already have radios going at night, and I'm sure tomorrow night people will be up all night in the neighborhood. So that's part of what I'm talking about. I think part of the answer is where Jane is, getting more resources coming down, and then us as a community being able to take care of ourselves because we don't know sometimes if anyone's coming to help.
I have a follow-up
Yeah, sure,
question.
Ted.
I've been working with Jane on that project.
And what could happen is you have the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. 1 year between 19 and 25 years old. What happens after that? Some of them could then graduate and join this Fire Reserve Corps. They're already experienced maybe in fighting fires. And then maybe some of those might graduate from that and become regular full-time firemen. And how I foresee it is, let's say the Malibu fire team was pulled somewhere else, you've got Ventura County or Orange County coming in. They don't know where to go. I know they said, where do I go to fight the fire? Well, you go down PCA, turn on heavy heather cliffs, and there's homes burning. Well, if you had a Reserve Corps person at the station, he could jump on that fire truck and say, I will show you where to go. I'll show you where the fires are. I'll show you what streets you can turn around on. So they would be essentially schooled in the home area here, this area. They wouldn't go off to Paradise to fight a fire there.
Yeah, and it's obvious, you don't have to be from very far away to be unfamiliar with every nook and cranny of Malibu. There's just too much here. Okay, I'd like to move to another question. I would like to give it to the person who wrote it. It's about tax qualifications. Okay.
There's two tax bases that you can deduct your losses. The first one is after 10% of your aggregated income. So if you make so much money, you have to only wait. Your losses have to exceed 10% of your aggregated income. Then there's a second level where it goes from $1. In 2017 fires, California approved the communities for level 2. How do we get to be level 2 also, so we can then deduct from $1, not wait until 10% of our aggregated income?
That's a fantastic question. I've never heard that before, so thank you for sharing that. We'll add it to the list, but I don't have an answer.
Okay.
Could I have your question card?
Yes, please.
Thank you for sharing that.
Here.
Yes. Oh, I know him, all right. I want to take a brief pause and introduce someone here. Brent, can I introduce you to the crowd? Brent is the head of the Los Angeles Emergency Preparedness Foundation, and this is the group that has studied disasters worldwide. And they, well, Brent happens to live in Malibu, and their group is doing a study on the fire in Malibu. I've been interviewed, they're interviewing people that stayed and fought the fire now, but the study is ongoing. And would you just let people know what you're doing? And I'm sure there might be some people here that you want to interview.
Thank you very much. I do want to introduce a couple other people on our team, Dr. and Shirley Jensen, Steve and Shirley. I want to stand up for a second. Both PhDs who are also on this project with us. Basically, very briefly, what we're doing is a two-phase study. The first phase is really looking at the stay and defend side. So we have talked to over 40 individuals who stayed and defended their homes, their neighborhoods, their businesses, and we're extremely interested in gathering that information together. We'll be issuing a report out of that probably within 60 to 90 days. That first report will come out. The second report will be much more detailed. It will take longer to do, and it will look at everything from the early notification issues, the evacuation considerations, resource concerns, repopulation, management and so forth of the fire itself, and that will take several months to do as well. I do want to thank all of you who have participated so far and helped us. If you want to register to be interviewed, you can do so by sending your name or email to us at wildfire, so it's just wildfire, at LAEPF, those are the initials of our foundation, LAEPF.org, and we would be delighted to contact you. But we thank you very much for your participation. We really hope it makes a difference. I've lived here for 32 years and been evacuated a number of times with the fires, and really understand and appreciate what a lot of you are going through, all of us as a community today. So thank you.
We really appreciate you you all showing up and helping Malibu. It means a lot to us. Absolutely. Thank you, Brent.
Okay, this is a question about the cable companies and removing old lines. Who?
Me again.
Okay.
Would you state your name so we have it on the tape here?
Gary Murphy. I see they sprung the new lines. I just might sure that they're going to take the old lines, because I remember in the past they would leave old lines up when you're redoing your house or something. I just don't know when that's going to transpire.
I haven't got a clue, but that's a good one. Thanks for adding that. I can tell you this, if anyone here, I think the Frontier issue is mostly solved, but it perplexed Frontier so greatly because they didn't build the system, they just bought it from Verizon. So what they did is they decided, I think correctly, to go back to where the fire came into Malibu, and they just followed the fire and tried to figure out what the heck was going on. I spent hours on the phone with some of their head tech, my wife did too. They were absolutely perplexed, there was no doubt. But there you go, so great question on.
They're sort of just strung them up, they're sort of, sometimes rope holding up the old ones.
There's a lot of line around, and I think when they were trying to get everything going again, they obviously didn't care about the old line. I have seen some cleanup going on in a couple of areas. When I watched them, I was up on Anacapa right after the fire, and I watched the crew come in from Southern California Edison. This is the most impressive part of that company, I'll say that right now. 4-man crew with a truck with a bucket, and a guy with a little chainsaw just walking ahead and just cutting out the old poles like the thing was butter. It was amazing. Ripping that pole out, planting another one, stringing the line up, and moving down the line. I'd never seen anything like it. I wish people with that work ethic from that company worked in Malibu every day, because they were amazing.
Okay, I think this is your question. You want me to read it? Sure. Okay. Do you mind giving us your name?
Yes, I do.
Oh, no, okay. And the question is, why does Mayor Wagner repeatedly say the east end of Malibu is going to burn in 2 years, 2 months, 2 days? Number 1 at OSB meeting, number 2 at council meetings. Based on these statements, there is an imminent threat of loss of life and property with expectation of severe casualties. I feel very scared. Okay, there is a huge fuel buildup in the part of our community that did not recently burn, and that is a concern. And I lived in La Costa during the time of the '93 fire, and it was massive. Different from this one, but it was bad. I will say, I wouldn't put this on Jefferson Wagner alone, it just seems to be common knowledge that where there's a fuel load, we need to be concerned about the next fire. So that's why we're meeting, okay? Because fire season seems to be almost year-round now. We all need to be learning from every situation. So yeah, we're here to learn about notification, evacuation. We saw what went wrong. Mikke and I like to say, had the spectrum of experience from staying and fighting the fire to being in the 5-hour road trip from Point Doom to Sunset Boulevard, and neither were enjoyable. So we don't want to repeat that again. And yeah, we did not feel safe.
Didn't you say recently that the people in the East End of Malibu are city?
You know what?
I don't know about that specifically.
Yeah, that was your words.
So
Any of us are sitting ducks when we lose communication, when we don't have access to electricity, and when we don't have access to water. And that's exactly why we're all sitting here right now, to improve on those situations as quickly as possible.
Do you think it's safe to reside in the city?
That's an individual decision. I mean, for me personally, I look at everything in my life as a trade-off.
I think, let me give that one a stab, because it's a great point. And I echo what Jefferson said. I echo what Karen's saying. I'm concerned. Yeah, we barely got my mom out of La Costa in the '93 fire. It was really close. It moves fast. If you live in a fire zone, which the East End of Malibu now has to be considered a fire zone, you should know exactly what you're grabbing if you're home when you hear of it and getting out of there. I know for myself, on high wind, dry days, doesn't happen often, but maybe more, I don't go into town. I just don't. It's like 1 or 2 days a year. And that was the '93 fire. I didn't go into town that day. I didn't go to work. And I'm glad I didn't. So we live in a high fire danger area. You should know what you're gonna grab. You should have pet carriers ready for your pets. Is it safe? I said this story earlier, I'll say it again. I got to fly the fire zone. I saw just how close it was to going into Topanga. And actually something the fire department did prevented it from going into Topanga. Topanga, and there's a resident from Topanga here I was talking to earlier, over here, is very scary to me. Now they're very organized, but there's roads and streets there that funnel into one little tiny windy road. I mean, I'm told the number is, and maybe you can correct me, 7 hours for a full evacuation. Yep. You may have less than 3 hours to get out of there. Does that scare me? Absolutely, absolutely. And so water pressure, electricity, there's a lot of things that we don't seem to be able to guarantee that we'll have in that situation, and that worries me. And that's why we're here working hard to try and get that better. Don, I'll let you add to that.
Thank you. The MRCA did an analysis, and some others, about a point of ignition. You never know what you want to necessarily distribute because there's nutcases out there. But the worst case scenario up at the top of Topanga, down to Pacific Coast Highway in 4 hours. And no way to get those people out. And we do have big problems, and a big problem that we have as a city is we don't control what happens in the county. And there was an article today, I think, in the LA Times about 160 million dead trees in California. Governor Gavin Newsom is trying to streamline the CEQA process to allow the clearance of those. At the same time, right now, that the County of Los Angeles is telling people in the burn areas not to cut down the burned dead trees on their property. Right now, that's their policy. At the same time that the County of Los Angeles is contemplating an update to the North Area Plan to significantly limit people's ability to clear the brush. At the same time that our agencies that are the biggest property owners in the Santa Monica Mountains that we all support, thank God we have them, but the state parks, the National Park Service, the Conservancy resist mightily doing brush clearance along the access roads, along fire breaks, on their property, and they own most of the mountains. So one of the things that you've got a real challenge on is that you're down here in the gun sites, but the fuel loads where the fires come from are outside of the city.
Yeah, and so part of my thinking on this, and this is just my thinking, is that that's why we have to be able to defend ourselves better. On-site water tanks, auxiliary power, etc. For myself, when my wife and I remodeled the house we bought, she did a fantastic job of building a house that's very fire resistant. So when I fought the fire, I was not near our house. I wasn't worried for it. Yes, it could have burned, but it was a low probability. And I knew that compared to the other homes in my neighborhood, which are mostly older. So that's another way of being prepared. Build a home that you feel you can leave in a fire, and because the landscaping is taken care of. The house doesn't have anything flammable, your vents are sealed, et cetera, et cetera. So there are answers, and that's what part of what we're doing is finding answers.
The fire department, CAL FIRE, NFPA, ask any fireman, and they categorically say, do not stay and defend. In other words, no fire agency, no fire chief, fire person advises that.
I wasn't advising that either. I'm saying a home that can defend itself.
What
So
you just said.
if there's water on site, that will help the firefighters if they come.
So you're not suggesting stay and defend?
No, I'm not telling anyone to stay and defend. Absolutely not.
But did you personally in this event, in this incident?
Yes, I did.
How many of the council people?
I don't know. I wasn't with them. I was all by myself.
4 out of 5, maybe?
Well, no.
Jefferson?
Jefferson did.
I think, I'm not sure about that.
Oh yeah, that's Rick's job.
Rick
so
Mullen is a fire
He
captain.
better have.
What about his kid?
I don't know. I would like to, excuse me?
Rick's son did stay and protect the house.
Okay, I would like to ask somebody in the audience to say something, and that's Tony Schaefer. Do you mind, Tony? Tony Schaefer is a retired LA City firefighter.
Correct. I want you to think about two things, though. In these fires, you've really got two fires going on. You've got a wildland fire, and you have structure fires. Probably 90% of all fires, those structures that have burned in the state of California in the last 5 years at least, have burned because the structure next door to them burned. And the only way you can limit that is by having an active fire force in place at the time when you need them. I live in La Costa. La Costa pretty much burned entirely in '93. And the only structures that were saved in La Costa were structures that had professional firefighters with apparatus and big hose and lots of water. Those are the only houses that were saved. If you look at the Thomas fire in Ventura County, you have clusters of 400 and 500 houses lost at a time. And actually, clusters of 300 and 400, because there was about 1,600, they lost 1,600 in the Thomas fire. But up in Paradise, exactly the same thing. These structures, so whatever force you develop, you've got to have a professional force, or at least professionally trained forces with heavy apparatus. My understanding is, in both the county and in the city of Los Angeles, there are virtually no extra pieces of equipment. So it's not only just a question of men that you're gonna, and I think the idea of some type of a volunteer force or a reserve force is a great idea, but they have to have apparatus. They have to have apparatus, because that's the only thing that's going to save the individual structures or the individual neighborhoods, not necessarily just structures. And it's a problem. This CAL FIRE doesn't know how to do it. Part of the problem is there's a lack of understanding when these strike teams show up on site, where some of them came to Malibu in this fire. They had no idea where to go. Even the commanders were from out of town. They didn't have any idea where to go. And so there's a lack of situational awareness on the part of both the IC and also in the field.
Tony,
Thank you, Tony.
By the way, the California Fire Reserve Corps concept is not volunteer, it's professional, paid, certified. You can also have volunteer. There's no question, that's two different things. And
I
you
understand.
require more equipment.
I understand, but it's really a major problem as far as equipment is concerned. Because you need big lines, lots of equipment, and lots of water.
How do we get that?
So that's a great question.
You're on your own, and the only way you can get it today is to prepare for yourself. And to get strike teams that are pre-deployed when you have fires in either one of these canyons. And to speak to a question earlier, the only thing that changed that could have happened in this fire started in exactly the same spot where fires have, for the last 50 years have started. And if the wind is blowing out of the northwest, it would have come to the east end. If it was blowing out of the northeast, it went to the west end. So it's a flip of a coin. And there's about a 45-degree azimuth in there where it can go in either direction or straight down the canyon the way it did to the Corral fire came.
Thank you, Tony. So that's the kind of, we're not trying to scare anyone, we're trying to find solutions going forward.
Can I make a comment to that? I'm a reporter, I've spent a lot of time on this issue.
Could you give us a name?
Yes, I'm Suzanne Gouldeman, and I'm supposed to be reporting and not speaking, but we've had ample evidence on Point Doom that people who did stay and put out spot fires saved a lot of houses. They didn't have equipment, they didn't have training, but they were on the ground there, and they saved my home personally, so I'm grateful to them, and sometimes the little bit of help is all you need.
Could I? Let me just respond to that. She's absolutely correct. In most of these catastrophes, houses burn 2 and 3 hours after the fire front comes through. And that's part of the disconnect between IC and the guys in the field. That equipment should have been dispatched into those locations. Right now the problem is, I don't know what the problem is. Exactly the same thing happened in La Costa, except we had hundreds of pieces of equipment and they still didn't know where to go. And most of our houses burned down 3 and 4 hours after the major fire came through. I had to go get a piece of equipment in order to fight the fire that saved my house, but we were fighting fire for 5 or 6 hours after the major fire had come through and everybody had left except for the 2-piece company that was from San Luis Obispo that was helping me. And it was easily 5 hours after the event actually occurred. The wildland fire came through. The rest of it was one structure setting off another structure and so on down the line.
So preparedness clearly is a big issue. I'll just share a little bit about my neighborhood quickly. So as you know, there's a fire brigade in my neighborhood. I was not officially a part of it. I was during the fire. We had fire equipment. I've had fire equipment for decades in the garage. So I had fire hoses, I had pump, I had gear, I had all of that. We deployed that. Other people in the neighborhood deployed that. It was very helpful. It wasn't the total answer. Just being there, as was said, was a big part of the answer, putting out spot fires. My neighborhood is a little unique, but maybe this is something to think about for your neighborhood. We have an HOA, and our HOA is looking at, I think they're going to set up a lot more equipment for emergencies in the future. Not just fire, but also mostly probably earthquake. We want to have more hose. We want to have metal boxes somewhat near fire hydrants. We want to have a mule that can move equipment around quickly. So there is things we can do to be more prepared in your own house, in your own neighborhood, and that's part of what we're doing, is trying to come up with recommendations so that if something comes to your neighborhood, you can feel more prepared. And that's why we're here.
And I will just say unequivocally, I don't advocate staying life before property. I mean, I left because I didn't think I could be helpful, okay? And when we lost power and I could no longer get news of how far away the fire was, I could see the smoke cloud, obviously, how far it was, if the wind was changing, what roads were open, I left, part of the reason I left was because I could get in my car, even though I was inching along Pacific Coast Highway for 5 hours, I could at least listen to KNX and hear what was going on. But you know, we've all heard, and maybe some of you have said it, oh, next time I'm not leaving, I'm staying for sure. Please think carefully about that. Saving your home is not worth your life. If you think you're gonna stay, I seriously encourage you and implore you to get training, to get together with your neighbors, to have a plan, to have equipment, to know how to use your equipment, to test it. I don't think I'm good at that stuff. So I plan on leaving again. I'm sorry. But you know, it's not worth putting your life at risk, and you may very well be putting your neighbors or a firefighter's or other first responders' life at risk if you decide to stay and you're the one who needs to be rescued. So please, you just have to take that seriously. This, you know, the gung-ho spirit, next time I'm not leaving, that might not be a good idea for every person, okay? It might not be a good idea for many people at all.
Yeah, Karen makes a great point. It was very noticeable in my neighborhood as we set up to defend our neighborhood as the fire came in. At first there was kind of a group of people, and then as the fire got closer, I think people were still in the neighborhood. They came up and they saw the fire and they pulled a U-turn and left. And then the fire got closer, and by the time I got there was 3 of us. And we knew what we were doing and we made a stand. But what was also noticeable is there was a couple other people in the neighborhood that left during the fire because they got overwhelmed. Because fire, knowing how to fight fire, it takes a lot of knowledge and skill. You've got to be able to read the flames. When they left, we stopped fighting the fire because we didn't know what happened to them. We went to look for them. I don't know if we lost a home or not, but it was a scary moment. So if you think, oh, I'm just going to stay and fight the fire because everyone did that and they saved their neighborhood, you got to know how to read fire. You really got to know what you're doing. And that's the same for other emergencies too. Mud flow, earthquakes, you got to know what you're doing. So yeah, I'm with you. I fear that by the fire department not being there and by some of us saving a lot of homes, it's created this atmosphere of, oh, we'll just stay and save our house. To which my answer is always, great, what kind of equipment do you have? Equipment? What kind of training do you have? These are important things to consider. And if you want to get the training, I think that's great.
Okay, we have a card from Dr. Jeff Harris and Craig Hill.
Great, two different cards.
Oh,
If you want to fill out a card, I can pass them out to you as well. So if anyone wants to.
Certainly there is a big communication gap between the field and the command, and I think we really need to explore that and make sure that never happens again. I've been told a lot of rumors like CAL FIRE was interfering and didn't know what they were doing, or that there were squabbles between Ventura County Fire and LA County Fire at the beginning about who was directing what. And I can tell you that one of my patients sent me a video of many fire trucks on Potrero Road and gave me a scenario where there were many helicopters for days there, and none of those Ventura County Fire came over to help us. So I think that's one set of issues. Another set of issues relates to that in terms of the ones who did come and didn't fight, and there seems to be way too many of those. And one thing I wonder is, you know, with our age of computerized maps and everything, can the city put together a map that would somehow be downloaded for any team that comes in, showing where hydrants are, where pools are, you know, all these kinds of assets that we have, some of which were not used at all during this fire. There's one picture in the Malibu magazine of a fire taking out a home with a pool sitting right next door. And that's the kind of thing I think we need to make sure doesn't happen again. Likewise, in terms of the water company, we need to make sure that the pipes are redone as well and that we have the flows that we need. And we also need to make sure that we have those standby generators for the pumping stations so that we can get water if the water is available to us from the water district and not as the tanks are running down. Related to the tanks, I was told by one patient that the water company made a decision years ago not to keep those water tanks full, and that the reason for that was because it took more chemicals to keep the water in a full tank. And that's another thing I think we need to explore. But thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I think you bring up great points. Communication's big. I think it seems apparent from the stories I'm hearing, I'm not sure what Brent's hearing, that the firefighters from outside of LA County, which are the ones that showed up in my neighborhood, had no communication with anybody. And in that case, they didn't do anything because they were told not to if they didn't have direct orders. So I think that's part of the problem. We discussed it directly. Karen and I got to interview Chief Osby, and well, let's just say they're aware of it, and we won't stop on that. And you brought up great points all the way along. Thank you for sharing.
Hi, Craig Hill. I'm your newest planning commissioner, courtesy of Mikke. 3 quick points, if I can, to tie together some threads. One is on the water. A couple of us from Big Rock met with Dave Reidman from County Waterworks last week about these pumps and about how do we keep the power going to them, especially given Edison's policy now of cutting the power off. And together with Dave Reidman, we figured out there may be a pathway to say it would cost about $100,000 in Big Rock's case, and it's probably analogous in other places, to get the 3 pumps that get the water from the highway up to the tanks, to get diesel generators on those with everything they need to run. Waterworks would actually then take over and run and maintain them. What they don't want to do is pay for them, but they said there is a FEMA matching grant for emergency preparedness. And so suddenly if the community is paying $50,000 towards that 100, for Big Rock at least, it starts to look possible. So that's one thing to think about. What can you get out of FEMA, and how can you harden those pumps to the tanks? And as for the flow question, they refill the tanks at night. Every night they top them off. So I think that was not quite right what your patient said. But what else? Oh, on the following Don's comment about it taking 3 or 4 years for the new tanks in, that probably sounds about right. And I think it's helpful to talk to fire in terms of getting the wiggle room, or whatever you pointed out, to point out that it takes about 15 years for an ecosystem here to become mature and become just ready to go off. So just because it might take 3 or 4 years to get those tanks in, the fire department should feel okay that if it takes that long, it's still okay for you to approve some of these variances and kinds of things that they might not otherwise want to approve. And then finally, in terms of people coming in and out, and we haven't quite touched on a lot of that yet, but one of the big problems was the sheriffs at the roadblocks and just being too hard line about it. It seems like there should be some threshold, whether it's people with CERT training, or maybe even something less. Maybe there's a training you could do for a weekend that just gets you certified for the sheriff's concerns, that shows them, yes, you're a capable individual, you're likely to be more help than hindrance, and it's okay to let you go through. And maybe that's CERT training. Maybe they don't want to stop at anything less than that. But at very minimum, they should have a list, or there should be a badge that the CERT person has that the sheriff can say, yeah, you're good to go through. Okay.
Okay, a lot of great points. I'm brilliant to put you on the planning commission. But I'd like to ask you to please, could you bullet point everything you just said and send it to us? And a reminder for everybody, because we have it on tape, but sure save us time if you email it to us. Yeah, excellent points, and some of those are part of ongoing discussions. I think you made a point that's so very valid that west end of Malibu burned already. If we're improving the water structure, the water system, there should be no problem in rebuilding right now because it's going to be cured by the time the fuel load gets higher. I think that's a fair compromise, but that's just what I think, so we got to work on that. But thank you.
I will just reiterate what Mikke just said, and for anybody who came in after, our email for this ad hoc committee is recoveryadhoc@malibucity.org. Please, if you could just take a few minutes and send us an email with the bullet points of what you've spoken to us about tonight. Yes, we are gonna watch this again, but it's just gonna be easier to deal with it, and we would really appreciate that. Meryl, do you mind if could I ask people to just fill out cards and just give us your name like a speaker slip at a city meeting? Is that okay?
Sure. Want me to speak and then fill out a card?
All right, never mind, don't worry.
That's okay. I'm happy to fill out a card. A lot of the people in this event that are in the worst shape are those who had insurance problems. So to address the eastern area of this, our community, I would suggest that people revisit their insurance. I had a friend that called me from the Topanga area. He was interested in me giving a value on his house. And he doesn't live in the area. And I said, listen, we just had this big event, which he'd heard from. He's overseas. I said, I suggest you contact your insurer with local knowledge and make sure you have the kind of coverage that you want based on what it costs to rebuild here and everything else. Because I've found people that are 50% insured of what they need to be. So even though, so the worst people, again, are the ones that were underinsured. So anybody that didn't have a loss, revisit your insurance with your carrier, particularly in areas which might be more susceptible now to future events. I mean, it's probably the biggest thing. Everybody could make a call tomorrow. Now, there's going to be some difficulties because some of the insurers are going to have some things in place that they may not be too eager to do insurance here. But there's some caveats. You can work through those things a lot of times. You know, also preparedness in those areas, making your houses more resistant to fire, clearing brush. I've worked for many years with Caltrans in the city to clear back brush from the highways. There was an incident a few years ago by Pepperdine, an ignition point right by the highway blew down and took out about 8 or 10 houses by Malibu Road. If that brush had been cut back, those wooden houses. But so in the last few years, our roads have been, the brush on Caltrans, which is responsible up to Topanga, and all of the PCH, the city roads and the county roads have been in the best shape they've ever been in the last 15 years. So if you see brush or areas which are a concern to you, let people know. Let the county know, let the city know, let Caltrans know. This is something everybody can be aware of and do when they're out there. And also, as Mikke says, the city put on a seminar one night about fire prevention 6 months ago or a year ago, I can't remember. And every one of the major fires has been in high wind events. So put your antennas up in high wind events and prepare. I mean, be alert, especially in those times, because all of these events are in high wind events. Thank you, Meryl.
Gail Gibson Howard?
Right here.
Okay.
I'm Gail Gibson Howard. This is my husband, John Howard. We own the property at 4241 Avenida de la Ensenada, which has been under construction for the past 10 years. And I'm sympathetic to everyone here who lost a home or who suffered fire damage from the Woolsey fire, but we are suffering too. And I don't want us to be left behind when the rebuilding starts, because we've been pressuring David Reitman and Water District 29 for the past 3.5 years, 4 years, for personalized water tanks. Our neighbor, 8 years. Dr. Whippen has not been able to even break ground. We've got in excess of $3 million in the ground, which we can do nothing with because of fire flow. When you allowed everyone else to put in personalized water tanks on Avenida de la Ensenada, and then you refused my husband. That's not right. Morally, it is wrong. And I want something done about it. So you'll be getting my email.
Okay, thank you. We definitely need details on that. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to hear about that. That doesn't make sense to me.
Is your home the one, Heidi, is that your next door neighbor?
Yes.
I saw your home on your property
Yes.
on Sunday, and as soon as I saw it, I asked about it because it seemed unusual.
Very unusual.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
We've been fighting, we've spent thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars with geology reports, with architects, with the fire department. Every time we go in, we have to pay again. We're done. I'm so ready to sue at this point.
And you're in the city, not the county, right?
City.
Yes.
And she's been like that for like 10 years.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I definitely want to get into that. I'm unaware of that situation, so thank you for sharing that. That's disturbing, to be honest.
Okay, my name is John Whiffen. I own the lot next to the Howards. I bought it 11 years ago. I designed a house, got everything ready to go, and the fire department changed the rules and said we couldn't build because we had inadequate fire flow. That was 10 years ago. We have spent, since that time, over $250,000, not me alone, although I spent the vast bulk of it, along with a few of my neighbors, to design the water tank and all the pipes and everything else that the water district asked us to design. And we were told that we would be at the top of the list when they started to build, which is why I invested the money, because I would like to be able to get my money out of my land. And then they decided to drop us. Now maybe we're back on the list finally, because as you mentioned at the beginning here, but the water district has not been our friend in this. The fire department hasn't been our friend. And so what Don is proposing with the idea of individual water tanks at every lot is extremely valuable and important, and it would make us safer, and it would make everybody else safer. And just for whatever it's worth, I was gonna build a house out of fiber cement blocks which have a 4-hour fire rating or something like that. It is about the most fire resistant house you could have built. But even that wasn't good enough. And I was a young man when I started this. I'm an old man now. I probably will never build in Malibu because of this. But what you've done is you've denied the county and the city the taxes that you would have earned over those years, because every year I get my tax bill reduced by 75%. And that's just on raw land. You can imagine it would be worth somewhat more if I could build a house. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. That's very disturbing. Yeah, thank you. I am aware of the situation. It took me a second to connect the dots. So Don sat with us just a few days ago and went through this in detail. So wow, thank you for sharing. Really appreciate you showing up. It's important.
Yeah, something's not right there, so we are going to look into it. But thank you for being here. Okay, Barry Haldeman, may I just give you the mic?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you both for chairing this commission, because I think it is so key, and it's never been done really in the way we should do it. I wanted to follow up on Jeff Harris's point about communication. I was out of the country when the fire occurred, but my daughter was with our house. We're on Malibu Beach, and we had about a year and a half or 2 years ago bought fire hoses and kind of trained on them. And fortunately, there were about 4 neighbors who were there who basically got him out, laid him out, and the fire jumped the highway, came down to the road, and would have burned it up except for them fighting for 7 hours. And I'm sure that story's around, okay. There wasn't a fireman around, and at the very beginning, somebody walked down the road who was a fireman and just patted him on the back and said, "Good job, keep going," and left. It wasn't until after the fire had passed that the Ontario Fire Department came down the road and said, "We didn't even know you were here." And that points up the communication issue. And I have over the years at a lot of public meetings have said to the fire department, how do outside agencies know where we are, what the canyons are, et cetera? Because they're afraid to go up if it's a dead-end canyon. So the last time we had a big meeting, I raised the point again. It was a disaster meeting a few months ago. They said, "Don't worry, we've got our cell phones, we're all," well, okay, guess what? So I'm wondering whether, as an immediate situation, we shouldn't focus on a couple of things. Number one, backing up the new communication with old communication, whether it's CB radios in each neighborhood and somebody's in charge of doing that, so there's at least communication among the neighborhoods, because nobody knew what was going on. It's giving the fire department some sort of radio equipment that could, doesn't have to rely on it. Maybe it's satellite phones, I don't know. So that's number one. Number two, just even giving them, a plexiglass map when they cross the border that says, as Jeff was saying, where the fire hydrants are, where the roads are, etc. Just as simple as that kind of structure. And I would also suggest one other thing, because I know a terrible story of a fire truck that came in on Sunday, and I had a friend who had a hot spot, and they, with two pools, and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and left when their house burned down. And I think that every fire truck should have a pool motor, one of those pool pumps on them is a requirement around here. And it's going to come up again, whether it's an earthquake or a slide or whatever. So I would really, this is something we could immediately do, and that is get in communication in some way. So that's my point.
Thank you, Barry. I think communication is definitely one of the key issues in this event. I think too that the lack of communication, in my experience and the experience of many, is one of the key causes of trauma. I think losing your house is traumatic, being in a fire is traumatic, but what also is traumatic is not knowing what's going on, not only for hours, but potentially for days. So that to me was probably the extent of my trauma. I was unable to talk to my family. They didn't know I was alive or dead for the entire day. That is traumatic, and I feel guilty over that, and that still lingers. I didn't lose my house, and there I am, traumatized by the lack of communication on multiple levels, and by talking to a fireman who didn't help because he couldn't get a hold of anyone and had no standing orders. So I agree. That's definitely a high priority, and I will say again, in my neighborhood now, that the people that are engaged in taking care of the neighborhood is a group about 10, all have walkie-talkies decent enough that they work well, and they're on all night. They'll be on all night tomorrow night. There's nothing formal yet. We're not waiting. So I think that, and that brings up other points that follow this. Neighborhood watch. If your community doesn't have neighborhood watch, how are we going to know that people who are disabled or elder have been evacuated from the neighborhood? The day after the fire, myself and another Tim in the neighborhood were woken by a fire engine going by about 5:30 in the morning. We ran out the door, ran up there, and the house was fully engulfed that we had saved the day before. It's pretty upsetting. I ended up walking around the neighborhood and checking everyone's eaves, knocking on doors, yelling and screaming, and out of a house right near one that burned down came a little old lady with her cane in her bathrobe. My heart just dropped. She came waddling out of there, and she'd been there all night, and nobody had a clue. So communication, I think, should be on a neighborhood basis. Obviously, the fire department, I've heard all sorts of rumors, they were upgrading systems, and this, I don't know the truth yet. But on a city level, that we obviously need to and are working to figure out what that is, because the lack of communication could be one of the most critical aspects here. You can't possibly fight fire or any sort of disaster if you can't talk to other people. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
My husband has been for decades a member of the disaster communication service for the Boston station. It's a good point. My husband's been a volunteer member of disaster communication service that affiliates with Lost Hill Sheriff Station for decades. He's in Malibu. I think we need something like that here, but to alert you, in this fire, the repeaters went out because I think they were on the same land, either Sparky's land or near Hans Lutz's land. So the DCS for Lost Hills, so I think we definitely need it, but we have to figure out where to put repeaters that might, you know, if one goes down, it'll still keep one up.
I'm hoping that this is one of those issues, and the city is hiring a consultant on it, and I'm just gonna hope that that's the right person, but I think there's gotta be best practices worldwide that we can apply back to the city on this issue, because I'm really hoping that, and that we can move forward. I'm sure it won't be cheap. There's also talk of sirens. I like the idea. I mean, I've been in, by the way, I don't know if most of you, if you know this, that most of the firefighters in America are volunteers. It's just California doesn't really do that. So much of rural America, they communicate with their firefighters. One way is with sirens. And I've been back east a lot, and you hear that siren, you know, if it's Friday at noon, at least it wasn't the town I was at, they were testing it. And if you hear it, and again, then you know there's, you know, the volunteers scramble and off they go. And it gives them a sort of a direction, and then they call in. So there's a lot of things we can do. I kind of like the siren thing because there's no mistaking a siren, but that's me personally. And
Okay, Honorary Kotler?
I have 3 comments. My name is Honorary Kotler. I'm a local resident. My husband and I stayed. My husband fought the fire. We live up on West PCH. I'm a nurse practitioner. I work in transplant, so we work a lot in protocols, so we're all about preparation. Couple things that I noticed in staying. One just happened 3 nights ago. My husband was up Mulholland, and about 3 miles up Mulholland, saw that the road was out, called 911 to let them know. We were immediately, that was LA 911, transferred to LACHP. Then we told the whole story to LACHP, we were transferred to Ventura CHP. Then they transferred us to a Ventura County Sheriff, and we ultimately ended up with Lost Hills Sheriff's Department. So it wasn't an emergency where there was blood spurting out of someone's leg, but unincorporated Malibu is grossly underserved in this time. In an evacuation, what the people up Decker, what they survived in the face of being an unincorporated Malibu, I think was a travesty. It was unfair, and it's all about being in an unincorporated area. So when you're talking about communication, for me, it's about making sure that everyone has the same plan, not just Malibu. The second piece is being a medical professional. I feel that in preparation, we should have a group. There's a disaster medical assistance team in Los Angeles. I tried to be part of that years ago, and with kids growing up, it's in Rialto, so you gotta drive all the way out there for the meetings and the training, and they deploy all over the United States, so it's very involved. I'm not suggesting that, but I feel like we could have a group of medical professionals that could aid in the preparation. What I found in visiting people, for whatever reasons we found out about them, there were seniors that were not prepared to leave, that no one knew about, and that were scared to open the door for a sheriff because they thought they were gonna take them out of the house, and they did not want that. And then, or there were people with special needs that didn't have time to evacuate, or they don't have family and it's just them, and they don't know where you're gonna take them and what they're gonna have to take with them, and they have their routine and they're not ready to leave. In preparation, we can form a coalition. Places like churches, senior centers, they love to help. And if we put together a group of medical professionals that could prepare and know where these people are and what's needed to get them out, we might evacuate them 12 hours earlier to a local place, and if it's a false alarm or something that's not affecting them, then we put them back, but at least we knew about them ahead of time. And then the last thing, sorry, this is how I remember things. The one thing, I do not advocate that we should have a medical assistance team for an evacuation. When we were in the evacuation, if somebody needed medical help, we advocated for them to get out of the evacuation area. I don't advocate that we should treat those people. However, with a disaster medical assistance team, in the event of an earthquake or PCH being closed or needing to triage, CERT has cursory training in that, but you're also gonna wanna know where are the doctors, where are the nurses, where are the EMTs, who's got the ambulances and where do they sit? Somebody should be in charge of that, and I feel like if you have all these medical professionals, and we had a bunch, and that were ready to do something, they just didn't know if it needed to be done. They set up a first aid tent. I saw maybe like 3 or 4 people, but it was like cuts and bruises, Anybody who really needed something, we advocated for them to get out. So I'm not advocating for treating people in the evacuation zone. I'm talking about preparation, and then if we can evacuate, having these people ready. And I will say that I grew up in a little town in New Jersey that had a volunteer fire department, and we had the 7 o'clock whistle, and outside of 7 o'clock, the whistle went off, there was a fire, and you also watched the roads because everyone was coming blazing out of their driveways to go to the fire department, and for snow days. So it was like for all those things. So, and everyone knew that's how things worked. It worked very well.
Thank you, Honore.
Excellent, excellent stuff. Thank you so much.
Okay, Scott Talal and then Bruce Silverstein.
Just a comment. I noticed, I know we've been talking about emergency backup power diesel generators for the water pumps. We need the same for the cell towers.
Yes.
That's a problem I've discovered. And here's why. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to have to ad lib. There's like 450 to 600 of them on different poles. 1,850 poles burned down. Problem. Also, so there's that 4G and 5G, whatever advantages it supposedly have, that's not one of them. So that is a big problem. 3G on the big towers, like if you go to Africa or other places, India, during emergency, they got great cell service. Doesn't do other things, I guess. I'm not a 3 or 4G expert, but apparently that's a real problem, and I'm not sure of the answer, but we lost so many of the cell things, they just burned down. So, great point, but I'm not sure what the answer is going to end up being. That's one thing I've learned already. A lot of them just burned up.
Okay, Bruce?
Thank you very much. So these are going to be a few sporadic different kinds of points. But first of all, this is a critically important project that you're undertaking, and I want to thank you for doing it. I would encourage you, I know that there's an issue about the scope. I'm going to encourage this committee to include investigating the adequacy and for the preparation for the fire and of the response to the fire by the city. I know the city does have limited authority, but I think it's important for the city to take a look at the adequacy of its preparation and response.
If you like, I could address that quickly.
Sure.
So we have been tasked, Karen and I, by the city council to bring a recommendation back on hiring an investigator to look at just that. We are in process on that. We had to find somebody completely unconnected to the city, which took a minute, but we figured out a way to do that. And we have conducted 3 phone calls so far, and so now we were talking about that earlier.
Communication with 3 firms.
3 firms. We've talked to 3 firms that all seem like they are potentially experts in this area. It turns out it's a whole field. Must happen in cities all over the place. Who knows? But so we are pushing that forward. So something's happening there, just so you know.
That's excellent news. I'm glad to hear that.
Bruce, and we've been given a budget for it.
Okay, thank you. So now, I know that everybody's nerves are still very raw. And the focus is obviously, for many people, on this particular fire. This fire is anecdotal. The fires are all over, and every fire is different. And the professionals really do know how to deal with fires generally. Every fire is going to be different, and there's going to be an issue with each one. Houses were saved by community members who stayed, and no lives were lost by the people staying to fight the fires.
One
We did have, was one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Girl in
So, but by contrast, in Paradise, more than 80 lives were lost.
Yes.
And that could have just as easily occurred here. And it could just as easily occur in the future if people are of the mindset that, look, at the last fire, we stayed and we saved our homes, and the fire department wasn't there, and therefore we should do the same again next time, because it could be a catastrophe that makes this look like nothing if that were to occur. The fire professionals know better. We heard from one already tonight. I do want to say something complimentary about our local firefighters. Just a week before this fire, the hillside under HRL, which is right across the street from my house, burned. It was around 1 in the morning. I think the fire was out within a half an hour to an hour. There was no need even to evacuate the neighborhood across the street. We watched it from our house. A year before, during the Thomas fire, the hillside behind the library burned. I think about 4 acres burned. Same thing, there were a few houses that had to be evacuated from the Knowles area, but otherwise, the fire department took care of it pretty quickly. Now, the reason I say these things are, I want to see everybody be able to rebuild their home as much as maybe the only people that want to see that more are the people whose homes were burned. But there are issues with fire codes. And everyone is saying, well, we need to just put them aside because we need our homes rebuilt. A fire in a home could be the spark for a wildfire. And it's not just an issue of we had a wildfire and the homes were being consumed and the fire department wasn't able to get to the homes. There could be a home that's on fire. And if that home doesn't have adequate ability for the fire department to get to it, which they will try if there's a home on fire, that home could be the beginning of a wildfire. And I think we need to understand and remember that, because again, nerves are raw and we're thinking about this fire and the fact that the fire department wasn't able to save homes for this fire, but every home that can be saved on an individual basis might prevent another fire just like this. So we can't lose track of that. We need solutions that both keep the houses protected as well as allow them to be rebuilt. I want to say just briefly also, and this is a subject that a lot of people aren't aware of, there is a concept called community trauma. This was researched beginning, I think, back when the Jonestown flood occurred, which wiped out a large segment of the population in Pennsylvania. People in East Malibu, whose homes were totally unaffected, those people are affected. When we lose a large segment of our population, thankfully very few people here were lost, but when we lose the segment of the population by way of homes that we've lost, everyone in this town is affected by this. And I know there's some effort to get relief to, psychological, emotional relief to people, but the concentration is on those who lost their home. I would encourage, and this committee even, to look into what is the broader effect on Malibu, because it's not limited to just those who specifically were directly affected by the fire. Just quickly, 2 other points. Lane closures. My family and I, we camped out at the Rouse parking lot along with probably a couple hundred other people during most of the day, wondering whether we were going to get back to our homes or not. And around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we got a text alert saying the fire's out of control, get out of Malibu. And it also said that all of the PCH has been opened to go south. About a half hour later, we left the parking lot, and as we tried to get into one of the other lanes, vehicles were coming at us in the other direction. So we actually were told that the lanes were open, and they in fact weren't. Because what had happened was they closed the PCH at Sunset, but there are many canyons that dump into the PCH between Sunset and here, and cars were still coming down the canyons and then turning north on PCH. And then Leslie, and this may sound naive, I don't know, it's a genuine question. Why isn't there perhaps a plan to get people to the beach as opposed to getting everybody out of town on the PCH? I have a hard time understanding how a fire is going to affect the beach and, if necessary, the ocean. I mean, a lot of people could have gotten there rather than being stuck in the PCH in a fire.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. A lot of people did go to the Zuma parking lot. Did anybody here do that? Yeah.
I've told my family that till things change, that's our evacuation zone, it's Zuma Beach. That's how.
But even at the beach, you've got to be able to breathe.
78 fire burned up the homes.
I live on Las Tunas Beach, and I was standing there the whole day, and we had all the gates open because if the fire ever did come east, we were ready because it was a parking lot, as Karen said. We were lucky to have a low tide that day, so a lot of people got to sneak in from Topanga and then come up through our houses to walk to their houses. But if there had been a high tide, because I live on a beach that's a high, low tide beach. So the beach is only good in certain places like Carbon and Zuma and everything else. All the beaches kind of east, if it's a high tide, you are not going out there, especially if there's big waves. So that's something that we all got to think about is what's the tide at the time?
Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Oh, okay, Ted?
A couple points. I fought a forest fire for 5 days when I was younger, almost died twice. So if you're gonna do it, be trained, don't stay. In the '93 fire, the city, I think, went all around the city and found out where all the pools and spas were and identified them. Do you have those records? Do you know where they are? Have they been done again? They ought to be done again. So you know exactly.
Reflectors in the streets.
What?
There's blue reflectors in the
Yes, are they there now? They should be.
We
But
have
that-
no idea.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
That there you know who's got a pool, who's got water for the fire department and for yourself. I also just sent you something that the Big Rock Mesa homeowners put together. The Big Rock Mesa Street Team's fire video is frightening. What they did is send it out. If you look at, take a look at it. They created an embers fire. They had a fan going through a wall. They created a house, and the embers went through. They filmed the whole thing, and they put different kind of roofs on, and we all watched the fire burn the house. You have a vinyl gutter, that's going to burn. You have pine needles in there, that's going to cause a fire. You have a doormat, that's going to burn. You have shingles, you're gone. Even a lot of the asphalt things will go ultimately. So that is it's a great video to watch. It also shows palm trees, which are bombs. It's frightening to see in that video this palm tree go up and the embers going everywhere. And they also showed the Oakland fire, 1991. People driving out, and the firemen were saying, "Get out of your cars and run." And one of my friends did that and died in the fire. Next point. I have a jacuzzi, I have a generator, I have a pump, and a hose. And that's something I'll be able to use. My house was saved because the guy 2 houses up did the same thing, and every time the house next door started catching fire, he put it out. So if you're gonna stay, we're thinking of to get that stuff. Also videotape everything in your house, put it in your safe deposit box, and also have a quick list and a long list, 15 minutes, everything you want to take out, 2 hours, everything you want to take out. And one final point, if the fire department and the water district want to prevent you from rebuilding, we had this meeting on Sunday with a number of lawyers who are going to be representing homeowners who lost their homes. I think a number of them would be very, very interested in filing a separate inverse condemnation suit against the fire department and the water district if they prevent you from building your house. If you're totally up to code beforehand, and if you can't build your house now, they will take that case.
Thank you. You made all sorts of good points and almost took your head off, but nice job, Ducky. It was close. I was going to say a couple things that you said. There can be immediate action. First of all, you talked about having a hose and a pump, but you got to have the gear too, because those embers are everything in a fire. So something you can all do now. You live in the Big Rock area with older homes is a great example. Make sure you put on the modern vents. It's the vents. I would guess from fighting the fire in my neighborhood, maybe half of the 21 houses we lost was because it got into the house, into the vent. They make new vents now. There's a number of companies selling them, and there's vents for the pipes on top and the vents on the side that prevent embers going in. If you're in a fire zone and you look in your attic now and your house didn't burn and you don't have good vents on it, it's black in there. So our house is new, and we had ash everywhere in the house. It came through the skylights. Even though they're sealed, it forced its ways through. So that's something people can do right now that you should think about if you have the older vents, get the newer vents.
Who else? Craig?
Yeah, quick comment. I cornered Captain Osby after the meeting, and just wanted to hear one more time, what kind of flexibility, how is this gonna work? And he, a couple times said, well, it's gonna be case-by-case basis, case-by-case, and then finally he did say, you know what, there are gonna be houses that are not rebuilt. That was just it, so we need to be prepared for that.
I hope you're prepared to be.
Brian?
You just think that those lawyers would be here like drumming up business right now. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Totally kidding.
I want to say one thing that's related, but kind of an aside. A lot of people have contacted me, I'm sure Mikke, other council members, asking about their particular situation. Mikke has the benefit of having been on the planning commission. I do not. But in either case, we don't know your individual circumstances. Please don't hesitate to contact the city. Contact Bonnie Blue, who's the planning director. Contact Reva Feldman, our city manager. They are really trying to help you find ways to make it possible. And I think there are a lot of tools in their toolbox. So please, if you are coming up to something that looks like a problem, that's my best recommendation. Have your architect or your engineer or you yourself contact the city or come in here in person. And every effort is being made to help people, A, rebuild, and B, expedite that rebuilding. So just know that's a huge part of our job here. Okay, Brian?
I'm going to add to that quickly. And if you don't know who to call or who to get a hold of, the huge pile of my cards here, just get a hold of me. And my information is on the city website. So I'll be glad to redirect if you need help. That's not a problem. A lot of people are doing that. So, and the other issue too that is coming up is, and the city's aware it's going to happen, and right now it's water flow is probably the big one. There's these pinch points that we're hitting in the rebuild process. If you're hitting one of those points, well, yours is a little different and more upsetting, but if you're hitting a pinch point right now, let us know so we can help you take action. If we don't know such that, here's an example that came up last night. Somebody got their slab, their foundation certified by a registered engineer that it was sound, but then the city wasn't so sure. Okay, that's not great communication, it's something we need to solve as an example. So if you're running into issues, you may be running into something that we haven't heard yet, or that you're the first to run into it, or other people haven't talked about it, they're just home mad or whatever, I don't know. Let us know. Communication, getting through a fire rebuild involves high-level communication, and you have to participate in that. It'll help you immensely, even if it's frustrating. Sitting home mad won't get it done, so be proactive, and that's what the experts are all saying. You gotta be proactive, and if I can help in that, or we can help in any way, just please reach out.
I have cards there too, just not as many. Brian?
Okay, so as someone that was here through the whole thing, one of the players that I haven't heard mentioned that definitely should be brought in on this would be the school district, because as we were trying to recover after the fire, and we naturally went to the school area where it was a big open space, and they came through and wouldn't help at all, and there's so much they could have done. They could have opened the cafeteria so we're feeding hundreds of people a day, and they could have helped by doing something like that. They could have opened the bathrooms, We had a lot of people coming through there, and so they just weren't a party to anything, and they definitely need to be brought into the fold because they have big facilities here within that can handle in an operation like this. So I think the school district is someone that you have to bring into the fold on this as well. As far as the cell towers falling down, I think it was T-Mobile and AT&T within a couple days had their own setups at Zuma and everything. And so communication slowly came back, but and I saw just this weekend they still have the portable, AT&T still has a portable tower up Decker, and I think there might still be one at Bluffs Park. I'm not sure. Is that one gone now? I was there for a long time. But those are mobile ones that seem to work fairly decent. I'm not sure. We all met each other at the turn there at Cliffside and Birdview for the people that were on the point, because that was the only place, and I think we were getting reception from down in Malibu maybe. But that was the only place to get reception. Zuma maybe too. And then as far as the neighborhood firefighting and all that, when you have a wildfire like what we had, where it's just so broad, It's not neighborhoods, it's street to street. There were literally just the people on your street were the ones that you could count on. People from 4 or 5 streets over, they weren't coming to help you. You were on your own. So neighborhood is great, but if it's one of these wildfire situations, it's really your direct neighbors if there's anybody that's gonna be there. And you know, I didn't expect the whole, I actually found neighbors I didn't know were there, actually stayed. But there's no shame in leaving, so anyone that should leave, in fact, my wife we waited too long to leave. There was no way to get off of Point Doom, every exit was burning, so came back and our plan was to go to the beach or we were gonna go to the water, but we didn't have to do that. Lastly, if they do let people back in or if you don't evacuate, one of the biggest issues, because I traveled around a lot, but I was on a motorcycle where I could get in and out. I could go a lot of different places, and that was key because there were a lot of people that had waited too long, and then they were trying to get back just because they left a husband behind or left someone else at the house to defend, and then you've just got these weird little traffic jams where people are like totally chaotic, going the wrong way, and all this stuff on Bush, and you can't come up and down Bush. You couldn't do a lot of things, so. I know it sucks that they won't let you back in, or you just have to understand that there's a reason, because these trucks are huge and they need to move around, and if people are out there and everybody's got a car full of everything, and believe me, it's a panic situation for almost everybody, so it's best that the roads are left open and there's down power lines, there's all kinds of things, so the evacuation is good in certain respects, and it's a reason that you should not just be out there on the road driving back and forth, because it's dangerous and it creates danger for everybody else. And then finally, I'll admit it, I have a pool pump. I don't have a clue how to use it, so I didn't use it. I decided that this was not the time to try and figure it out. And you know, on top of all that, you have to have gas, and you have to have good gas. You know, gas doesn't last forever, so you have gas only for a slight bit of time, and then it's no good, and then you'll fire up your machine and it won't work. So preparation is totally key, and I wasn't prepared. And
you have to test it.
But you have to test it regularly. Yeah, exactly. You can have all the equipment, but unless you know how to use it, it doesn't matter. And I know also there was a house on Horizon that I saw, a house burn, and they had a pool. I could see the pool pump was out, and it had burned too. So it's not a safety factor that if you have one, you're going to be safe. It is still a very dangerous situation. And so those are just the point. The only other thing, I guess maybe that's more for the investigative part of it, but when I was in Malibu Park during the most part of it, where it was really bad, I don't know if there's a whole lot any of you that have houses that lost up there could have done. It was a serious wildfire up there. But I did see, it was Oxnard City and Ventura City, not county, but city trucks. There were about 6 or 8 of them, and there was 1 helicopter working that area. So there were some people up there, and then when I stopped to ask them, hey, I live around here, I can help show you the roads, they said, no, we don't need your help, you know, so I don't know how good it would work.
Brian, when did you see those trucks in Malibu Park?
It was, I can tell you, because I got a picture, so I'd have to look, but I'm guessing that it was right when the fire came down Bush, and it was burning everything on Bush and Harvester, and it was heading towards the school and the equestrian park, going down the gully right there. And I'm guessing that was either 11-ish maybe, wow. 11, 15.
You saw 6 trucks in Malibu Park at 11 a.m.?
Yes, for sure. Counted them. They were on Bush and Merritt and Harvester right there. But you couldn't go any further up because it was just, it was insane. So,
It did leave though, backed up.
well, I don't know what happened to them. No, they were fighting fires. They were there and they were actually fighting fires. But I don't know what happened to them after. I saw the helicopters, everything. My main thing as far as that goes was earlier in the day I saw, you know, DC-10s and everything and multiple helicopters and other things fighting the fire up Latigo. I could see this from the top of Point Doom, and they had big planes and everything. And it struck me as unusual that you know, they kind of were doing so much in that area that is less populated than where the fire was obviously heading towards the more populated areas or the bigger density areas, so.
They're blocking it from going east, right?
Yeah, well, they were up there pretty active, you could see, but but by the end, I know, and I don't know, others can attest, William, you were there, but I didn't ever see any air support at all on Point Doom the whole time. And I didn't really, other than that one helicopter in Malibu Park, I didn't see anything else there.
And he made one drop, to the best of my knowledge.
I saw a drop that was behind the bush in that gully that leads to the equestrian park. I saw him do a drop in there. But you're right, I only saw him one time, but at that point it was time to move on because it just wasn't, unfortunately for Malibu Park, it was a tough situation. It was very dynamic up there, for sure.
Thank you, Brian. I will say about Point Doom School, that became a significant gathering area and relief area. People showed up to help, to get information from each other. They brought food, water. It was important. Most of you probably know our school district is headquartered in Santa Monica, a city that we do not share a border with. So it becomes very logistically difficult to get partnership with the city, with the school district. One of 4 SMMUSD meetings per year was held here this past Thursday night. I was there, and the Malibu High Site Council President Seth Jacobson, who many of you know, pointed out that the plan needed revision and improving. So that's going to be worked on not just for Malibu High, of course, but for all of our Malibu campuses. And yet we need a better partnership with the school district. I encourage anyone who is so inclined to contact the school district and let them know how you feel about that. Santa Monica is 84% of our district, our school district. The situations they deal with there, the disaster situations, are urban situations. Structure fires, perhaps terrorist threats. I know they had a bank robber run through one of the schools one time. Their issues, not that that couldn't happen here, but their issues are substantially different from ours. So I've been an advocate for Malibu in the realm of the school district for a long time. And that is an area that needs attention. I'm working on that. I will continue to. And in the meantime, we are still working on separating the school district and having a locally controlled, independent Malibu Unified School District. But thanks for pointing that out, Brian. That was significant. And I know the reason that that campus was used is because the lock was cut. And there's literally not as much as a custodian, or I take that back, not a custodian. There's not a facilities person from the school district located in Malibu. Principals have to put in a work order to Santa Monica to get things done out here, which is not good for us in the best of circumstances. And in a situation like that, means a lot of help that could be given is left to people cutting bolts and climbing fences and taking over.
Hi, do I need to stand up? Okay, I'm Annie Ellis, been here over 60 years. A couple of things that were not mentioned tonight, and I know people have thought a lot about this, it's been brought up before, but it's been at least 30 years since we started talking about putting our electricity underground. And there are a few areas in Malibu that have gotten to do that. Broad Beach Road is one of them, Malibu West. You know, and then I watch them, I was told that there were in the entire Woolsey fire, there was over 3,000 poles brought in, wood poles, to replace the burnt wood poles. Now, and we had no communication of, there's 5 driveways, and we're right on the bluff between the west end of Broad Beach and El Matador State Beach. And all the people on the bluff are, let's see, well, my great nephews will be 5th generation of our family, but the Runyons are next door. They have the Old Place restaurant. And we got all of the main people out, which is my 88-year-old mother, Barbara Runyon, who's almost 90, like everybody that lives there full-time is elderly. There's now 14 houses, including the 3 on the beach below us, on our little street, okay? There's only 4 houses that people live in full-time. They're more like weekend houses or once-a-month houses or something like that. So I was the only one on our street that stayed. And I'm glad I did though, because I was able to get one fire department that came up the last driveway. They were leaving when they jumped in it. They got it out at El Matador. And they had gotten it out on the Broad Beach side. It burned houses and jumped on each side of us. What they didn't see was Herb Albert's shed on fire. And this was about 4 hours after they left. At 10:45 in the morning, it was pitch black. I could not, it was like nighttime up there. And his big piece of property is so, so many trees and stuff that they couldn't see down there. But I kept seeing this other smoke. So the 5th guy that came up from the El Matador, they were leaving, finally went down there for me. And the sparks had gone under his deck of his house, and it started burning that. If that house had gone up, all our houses right in there would be gone when they had saved, stopped it on both sides. So they actually cut that deck off and threw it in his pool. That was with their chainsaws, that's all they could do to get it. But, so that's one thing, put it underground. The other big thing, and it was about 1.5 years ago when the fire department was coming down our little street. And I'm gonna talk to you personally about this problem we're having down there. But one thing that happened was they came around the little corner, and these trees have been allowed to grow out too far, and it actually broke the back light off their fire truck. They tried to make the next corner, and that's an easement my mom had to make when she split up that whole thing. And this person over here has pushed out his property into the easement. So I'm trying to deal with that, but so they couldn't make the corner, so they cannot now get to the 3 elderly people that are down below us in the beach houses. But coming to my point is what they said to me at that time. I spent 3 months on my own trimming all the trees that are on our property line between us and the Runyons, okay? Funny thing is the fire department, I forget which, it was years ago, a fire that came through there and burned several of the houses right next to us. The fire department actually handed out little pine trees to put in. And they laugh about it now because these are really bad pine trees. And so half these trees are literally clumps, huge clumps of dried pine needle, like this deep under these trees, and half of them are dead. So I spent months taking a bunch over to the dump and, but the biggest thing is they said to me, they go, Annie, those are, because they were there doing brush clearance checks, and they write people little things, you gotta clear your brush, and they said, those pine trees are worse than the brush. I said, well, can you write something? And they say, no, they only do brush clearance checks. So all these trees, they can't write up people. And I see so many right now of all these trees that are literally, they're stringing lines through them, and their trees are wrapped around all the telephone lines, okay? When we had, in the last few years, we've had, I don't know how many that they said a spark off of, one of the poles got a tree on fire, and that's how these fires started in Malibu. One was when the fog came in. It had been really hot, and then the fog came in that night, and GT, they have, the reason for whatever. But so many of them, they're saying the spark gets a tree that's right there, and that starts the fire. So I guess my point is maybe tree clearance as well as brush, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Annie.
It's a great point. The one little thing I learned, and maybe I learned it from somebody here, is that what mainly LA County has as far as fire trucks is what's called, I think, I want to get, maybe you can help me, a type 1. Oh, is that you, William? As opposed to a type 3, which is made more for rural environments. And apparently all the new ones they've ordered are type 1, which can't get down your driveway. Very interesting point that we plan on talking to many more people about.
Just ordered 20 more type 1s.
20 more type 1s. So if everyone moves to the city, the type 1s will be there to help you out.
And Annie, just to address what you said, there will be a proposed ordinance coming before the council. I'm not sure how long the staff is working on it. It was my request about landscaping going forward, non-native, highly flammable. Not everything can be codified, not everything will be an ordinance, not everything will be required. It doesn't stop people from making their homes more safe, doing tree maintenance, deciding what you plant, where you plant it, how close is it to your home. You know, are there dead palm trees? Sure. And you know, I realize tree maintenance is expensive, but is it more expensive than losing your home? I don't think so. So I think everybody really needs to think in terms of protecting ourselves. And I will say, being a good neighbor, there are things that are not required that we would be smart to do. And it's, you know, it's something to really think about. Yeah, Robert?
I mean, I stayed and fought the fire in my home in Malibu Park, and I'm very fortunate I saved my home, but most of my neighbors lost their homes. I live in Harvester, it's a wasteland. And I personally witnessed one of my neighbor's eucalyptus trees catch on fire, which I had been afraid of ever since I lived there. And I personally watched a giant chunk from that tree fly like a meteor and land 2 houses over, and 30 seconds later, something on that house caught fire and it burned to the ground. So someone else's trees burned another neighbor's house down. That's just not right.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. There's no doubt palm trees were a nightmare during the fire. They were for me. They do this like an ember spreading device. Railroad ties. I still want my night of sleep back putting out railroad ties. They just, you can't put them out. And yes, if there's like a 30-foot railroad tie wall and you sort of ignore it because it doesn't matter and it lands by your garage, it'll 3 days later it'll light your garage on fire. So yeah, if you have railroad ties, well anyhow, you now know.
William, would you like to say something?
I'm just backing Robert up. So what happened on my street? Good evening, everyone. So I used to be a Forest Service hotshot. I've been on 100 hotline fires. I was a lead saw for Wasatch hotshot crew, and so I had plenty of experience. I felt comfortable being at my house. I prepared a safe zone for evacuation for myself, my body, in case worst case happened, which worst case did happen. But I had a truck full of animals, so my conscience got to me. I went out to the street, got my truck, which I'd staged probably a quarter mile away, got in it, went down to Zuma Beach. But what happened is the neighbors, eucalyptus tree, their deck caught on fire. I had only a shovel to work with. I was kind of trying to save about 5 houses at a time, going around shoveling, just working really hand tools only for about 4 hours. Finally, their deck, I just couldn't get to it in time. Kind of creeped up to the house, the whole deck blew up. Caught a eucalyptus tree, 200-foot flame, 3 other houses. Just that quick. That's when it was time to leave.
Who else would like to say something?
Those stories,
Carmen?
thank you for sharing them. I mean, I think it's important, if we're all sitting here, we have different stories. By you guys sharing those stories, we now can kind of share what's going on that we need to be aware of. Because for whatever reason, I kept wondering about it until I talked to you. I did not have eucalyptus in my neighborhood burst into flames, which I couldn't figure out. Palm trees did. So hearing that from you two is very important, I think, for everyone to be aware in your neighborhood what's going on and the potential consequences. So I thank you both for sharing it.
Everybody in Malibu, the one I sent to you.
And then we got Ted's eucalyptus video.
That was the same in our neighborhood as well. The eucalyptus didn't, but the palm trees were insane, horrible.
Apparently,
So I
some
don't know.
species are, they're
Yeah,
really different.
there's
Some are
200,
good.
there's 200 varieties, and what he's probably referring to are the blue gum, which have so much, just a mass of stuff. So they're not all eucalyptus are created equal.
People's ficus hedges burned too. We have two on Point Doom where it turned a corner. It's the weirdest thing. The fire, it's going with the wind and then it turns the corner and goes against the wind. I've never seen anything like that.
I just have a question, and I don't know how many people it would affect, only people that lost their homes. I just heard today from my dentist that if you don't rebuild your house within 2 years, you face a huge tax burden. That it's like, you know, when you sell a home and you have to reinvest your money in a new home and you get the tax. So I don't know if that's true. I just wanted to bring it up to people to be aware of. So
More good news.
I don't know if that's true, but it's something to look into.
Just one point, we had a meeting on Sunday where we had a number of lawyers there who wanted to be hired for the Southern California Edison. That video is now on the Bill Kerbox filmed it. It's now online. You should be able to get a hold of it if you're interested, if you missed the meeting, to find out if you're interested in being represented by one of those firms. Take a look at it. It's about 2 hours long, and a lot of your neighbors were there. We had the conference room just totally overflowing with people.
Can I just make one comment? Good evening, my name is Barbara Bigelow. I live on Cavallari Road. I'm a nurse. My comment is with respect to human life and our health. And, you know, my husband and I, we lived here 39 years, and we really love this town. And those of us who still have our home, thank goodness my husband and son saved our home and our next door neighbor home. But my real point is that we should all, as soon as possible, get N95 masks and put them in our house, because honest to God, you know, I'm a very happily married person and I love our kids, and I wouldn't want my husband and son to stay if they didn't have those N95 masks in my whole box that I got. When I heard on the national news many years ago about the bird flu, it had nothing to do with the Malibu wildfire. It was, get this, blah, 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 N95 mask because of the possible bird flu coming. So I called up a medical supply store. We don't have one in Malibu. I called them up in Thousand Oaks Boulevard and they said, we only have one of these. They're the most expensive masks you can get. And I said, okay, I'll be there in less than an hour. So bottom line, I left a few with my son, our son, and with my husband, because they stayed. And I went to Zuma Beach and I gave out the whole rest of my box to everybody I could find. And then I didn't have any more. But we've got to take care of each other, and we have to be very proactive when it comes to our health, because I mean, my heart is very, very broken I look out at my house on Cavallari and there are homes all around us, and these are people we know, all around Malibu Park, all around Trancas, all around Anacapa, all around this beautiful country, you know, animal-loving, people-loving, nature-loving community that we have. It's devastating, and we really need to think about our health and be proactive. So please get those N95 masks, because for those of you with another fire someday, if you do want to stay, I wouldn't want anyone to stay if they didn't have a mask on. And I am already worried about those people that did fight the fire that weren't wearing masks. And I'm also very concerned about those of you who did stay and fight the fire and you haven't talked to your insurance company. And this is not about making a buck. This is about your health. There I go again, I'm a nurse. The cars that stayed for those people that fought the fire, a lot of them have ash in them. And when I asked our insurance company, and I said to the guy, I'm not a foo-foo girl. I don't care about the leather. I care about my son's life and my husband's life long-term with their lungs, if they're gonna put the air conditioner on, if they're gonna put the heater on. Would you just check their cars? Their cars were here from Friday. They didn't leave until Sunday night. So what is the condition of their cars when they turn the heater on, their air conditioner on? Do you know that an insurance man was outside less than 20 minutes and he came in and he goes, there's visible ash, they're totaled. You don't make any money for it, guys, but they come and they tow your car away and you get another car. So for those of you who fought the fire, I know we're 3 months post-fire, please have your cars checked. I don't want anything to happen to your lungs. I mean, I've got a girlfriend who was in the Navy, for goodness sakes, and we like to think our government takes care of our military. We're very patriotic people, most of us. And her husband died of mesothelioma because of his lungs, because of asbestos on the Navy ship. So we have to be proactive. So please have your cars checked by your insurance company if you stayed and fought the fire, and go to a medical supply shop and get those N95 and get enough of them so you can have extra for your family and your friends and your neighbors if they don't have one and we have an emergency, you can share and help other people. I'm already giving them out now to my friends in Thousand Oaks and everything, my masks. I'm gonna have to buy another box soon, no problem, because I want them to have them for their loved ones. We must help one another.
It's not just cars.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Those are at Home Depot.
Well, I went
They're
to
in-
medical supply shop. I like the one that, there's a different kind than the round one. I don't particularly care for the round one.
Okay.
They sell the rest. I'm very particular. They sell them
Yeah, they're in the paint aisle.
That goes under the chin. I like the one that goes under the chin where you can really push it to, yeah, depending on the shape of your face, it's much more secure than the little round one, because you want to push it up and cover your chin.
That's a great point. I think, and if you really are gonna get trained and stay, you probably actually want actually a better mask.
Yeah.
So, great point, and I need to bring my car in. I noticed it smells bad. It smells like fire. That's probably not good.
Okay, sorry, I just have, thank you for that information. I didn't even think about my car. I did have to go down to urgent care and get quite a few breathing treatments, and still am having problems, but didn't think about the car. Just one other question about the trees. So, the one neighbor who planted all these trees in a street utility easement, that is my mom's actually, and he actually got pissed when, because that's his zen to walk down, when he walks down the street to the beach. He liked those big pine trees that were half dead, but, so he got mad at me for trimming those. But there's another neighbor who's, a weekend neighbor, or, once a monther. He has a couple guys that live there and take care of his home, and he made a little lot kind of down below of the beach, right? And he put in these huge palm trees, and he's never trimmed them. So they have about at least 20 feet of all the dead palm fronds. And now we're losing our entire sunset view, but other than that, I think it's super dangerous. So what can we do about these neighbors that refuse to cut their trees? The one doesn't care that he planted those trees illegally in the easement and the fire department can no longer get down there. And the other one, he likes the palm trees full like that for the shade on his little, illegal lot. And I love my neighbors and I don't want to turn them in, but I've pretty much had it. Like, who can I turn them into?
You bring up a great point. Two things come to mind. Number one, I'm remembering now, because it didn't go through, that Laura Rosenthal, when she was on city council, brought forward a motion to deal with palm trees. And I think the city council at that point actually, I don't know if they even seconded it, did they? I don't remember. I don't remember that going forward. I think we probably have more appetite for that now. And second of all, I know the current codes on tree issues, and no one's gonna like what they are, but it becomes, it's a civil issue. So you have to sue somebody over it right now. I don't know what other things we can potentially do about that, but it's on the list now because you brought it up. It's a great point.
And I had a point on mattresses and pillows. You live in the area where if you have, live in an area where you've had smoke and ash, and you haven't replaced your mattresses and pillows, take your pillow, put it in a bag, take it down to the beach where there's clean air, and smell it. If you smell smoke on it, you're sleeping on toxic material. So replace your mattress. Get your insurance company to do it.
Actually, I was gonna, that's a perfect segue, and I don't want to be an alarmist, but, and this also segues from the cars. we interviewed a lot of lawyers over the past 2 weeks.
Bruce, will you explain what you have been doing?
Well, I'm happy to, but let me talk about this first. This is more critical. What Ted's saying, we learned, I don't recall if it was from one of the lawyers or from an adjuster, but somebody told us, and it made so much sense, that if you live in an area where there is smoke and ash, you need to do this test, or something like it. But the point is, though, then not to get rid of your pillows and your mattresses. The point is, you're living now in a toxic home. If your pillows and mattresses have smoke and soot residue, even though you don't see it, and one simple way to test this, by way of an example, and this is not the scientific test, but one simple way to test it is to take a pillow, we were told, put it in a plastic bag, seal it off, take it down to the ocean where the air is presumably fresher, then open it up and smell it. But if you smell smoke, the answer is not get rid of your pillow. The answer is you can't live in that house. You need remediation. And you can get really sick if you don't. So I mean, I don't want to be a fear-mongerer, but a lot of us are being told the emergency's over, your house is fine now, people had it cleaned by ServPro, and everything's fine, and it's not. So, I mean, there can be health problems that are going to surface for the next few years, possibly longer term. And I mean, especially think of infants and elderly people whose systems are not as healthy. So, that's what I say. As far as the lawyer issue, I mean, I didn't want to use this as a forum for that.
I mean Operation Recovery.
Yeah, okay, so I assume people here are aware, but Operation Recovery was started by the owners of the Malibu Times. It's not technically a Malibu Times operation, but it was begun in 1993 after the fire, when the owners of the Malibu Times lost their home. And the concept was get as many members of the community together who have suffered loss and have them share what they're going through for the purpose, not for the purpose of commiserating, but for the purpose of figuring out what the common needs were so that they could be addressed in a common manner rather than on a person by person by person manner. Just like the issue with Chief Osby right now, that shouldn't be on a person by person exemption basis. They should be meeting with large segments of the community and solving problems for many people. But so the concept back in '93, when there was not social media and the local newspaper was pretty much the only way to get a hold of people, was let's get people together. You're going to have common insurance problems. You're going to have common construction problems. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they even had a showroom where some high-end appliance manufacturers came in and offered substantial discounts because large portions of the population wanted to buy the same kinds of things for their homes. This has been reinstituted. And we are looking at every single kind of thing, goods and services that people in Malibu will need. And it's on a much larger scale now, obviously, because we have, I guess the count last night was 400 homes in Malibu. I had thought it was higher. It's higher. I mean, I saw a list and I counted 750. I saw 400 last night. No, that was just a list of Malibu.
Damage too.
No, there was a list published that showed 750 destroyed homes and addresses, but last night they said at the meeting that counted perhaps guest homes, garages, I'm not sure. But any event, the destruction here is huge. And the destruction's not just Malibu, it's double or triple when you go out of Malibu. And the more people who need the same things, who get together to acquire those things, the less expensively, the more efficiently, the more expeditiously it can be done. And we're still in the midst of a project, we've done a substantial part of it in trying to find lawyers who will represent people in a claim against SCE. And the point here is, you're not looking to hire a lawyer, they're looking to buy your claim. They want your claim. They're salivating for people's claims. And this is not a situation where you need to convince them to take your case, they want your case.
And we're pushing down their contingent fee, down.
Right, we're already at 1/3 less than the third they started at. And I'm not sure if there's any more room to go, but this is unprecedented. But people need to be, if you haven't hired someone yet, talk to your neighbors who haven't hired someone yet, because there are the cream of the crop available out there, and they're not the ones that are aggressively soliciting people. And they are willing to lower their rates substantially if enough people, economies of scale, if enough people hire them. But I wanted to talk about the mattresses and the pillows because that's the really more pressing issue. People need to get their lives back in shape.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to say something, ask something? Okay, Lance?
We're getting towards it is 9 o'clock now, so if you have something important, we'll head towards sort of wrapping up this first one.
Well, at the express trepidation is sounding really alarmist. The week after the fire, I spoke at the city council. And I was very concerned about the fact that the origin of this fire was a state Superfund site.
Yeah.
All right, Rocketdyne. Lots of radioactive crud, lots of toxins. And so I contacted someone from the Physicians for Social Responsibility to come in and to address a meeting that we had at the Jewish synagogue. This was a state Superfund site. We need to press the state to measure the soils. And we're talking about pillows and bedspreads and cars. We can have radioactive material. I don't know if we do, but that could have been transported over and could be deeply embedded in our soils. And we've got to have somebody check on this. We've got to know. And this should be a state responsibility.
I think people have done it individually, I haven't.
Yes, I've heard that it's been done and it didn't, whatever fallout there was, didn't get this far as what I've heard, but
The
correct me if you have-
MRCA did extensive testing on all of their property, and there was nothing above background noise.
I used to work for Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I was looking at this issue about 15 years ago. So the cleanup's been going on forever and the fighting about it. There was and I raised the issue then. You've got all this sumac and all the other brush there that's taking up all these toxins out of the soil, growing up through the roots. The plant is actually saturated with whatever's been in the ground. So the bad news, that's the bad news. Maybe the better news for us is a good chunk of that area burned already, like, I forget, like 10 years or so ago. So a lot of the stuff that had been taken up by the big brush was probably burned off then. Not to say that it's not a problem now. There's probably some didn't burn there that did burn now, but just that it's both maybe better and worse than what you said.
They have had 3 nuclear meltdowns at the Rocketdyne plot. 3 nuclear meltdowns. Now, uranium, nuclear toxicity doesn't go away in your lifetime. It may not even go away in the lifetime of Europe. So I really think that it should be incumbent upon the state, and we should petition the governor or the state to come in and do the tests that are necessary so we can at least say with all assurance, look, I hope I'm wrong. I don't want to be right, but it's your property. And for those of you who want to continue to live here, like me, it could affect us forever.
Let me add, we just found out yesterday that there was a drainage from the Superfund site that was covered over aqueduct. The fire department uncovered it, and then they took helicopters down and they took water out of there and dropped it on some of the homes, I think in Bell Canyon area.
This is not substantiated yet. This is
Not
just an allegation.
substantiated, but it's something that we heard yesterday that may have happened.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm depressed totally now. It's all your fault,
We
man.
need to know the answers.
No, I agree. We appreciate the input on that. It's important. Thank you.
I think we're gonna wrap it up tonight. We will be having at least 2 more meetings like this. We have not set the dates yet.
Right, a meeting like this brings up stuff, and as you notice, as we progress through the last couple of hours, stuff keeps coming up. It's gonna continue coming up, and that's why we're gonna do more meetings, because things are gonna occur to you, and you're gonna hear things and go, oh wait, so we're gonna keep this going.
So we've got to look at the calendar and see when this room is available. Our plan is to alternate the meetings, weeknight, evening, and weekday during the day to make it as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. There are some meetings coming up that are being run by Sheila Kuehl, our county supervisor. She has also launched her own investigation at the county level, and I'll give you those dates if you're interested. My understanding is they will both basically be the same format, so you could certainly go to both meetings, but I think they're going to be similar. The first one coming up is February 23rd, which is a Saturday, at Pepperdine, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's a whole lot of information gathering and sharing.
It's called a listening meeting.
Yes. The second one is Saturday. I have it on my calendar as Sunday, March 3rd. I think that's the date. Again, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., and that one's going to be at King Gillette Ranch. If you're so inclined, you could attend one or both of those meetings. We will be publicizing the next meeting like this. Again, please, you can either use either of our city email addresses, kfair@malibucity.org, Pierson@malibucity.org. Our emails are on the city website. Or you can use the Recovery Ad Hoc email, which is recoveryadhoc@malibucity.org.
Karen, as a committee, are you going to be issuing a report, or as a committee, what are you going to do?
I think absolutely, we're gonna break this down into a number of buckets. I think we have like 6 or 7 right now. And yes, we're gonna give a report on all of them. And we're gonna talk about as we go. I don't think we need to do a secret report, secret meetings and not share information. So, but yes, of course, we want to, at some point, and it'll be a number of months, obviously, but we want to come up with what we think are ideas that we've gathered from you, from the experts we talked to, from the talking heads and the rest of the government, and share all that absolutely, publicly.
Will you send something out of the sheet?
Those are on the city website. We can put them out again. I imagine they will be in the Malibu Times, the Surfside News, KBOO 99.1. You'll probably see them on Nextdoor, Facebook. We can do that. I don't think I have a whole lot of Twitter followers. I've got like 10. Follow me if you want. I'll put the meetings on there.
Just give it to me and I'll put it on Facebook.
About the two county meetings being organized by Sheila Kuehl, February 23rd at Pepperdine, March 3rd at King Gillette Ranch. I will do everything I can to push that information out.
Karen, are you starting making recommendations as part of your report? Is that the idea? Are you guys going to be making recommendations as part of your report?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a brief announcement also. On Wednesday, the 27th, the Malibu Chamber of Commerce and a nonprofit, Coalition for Fire Safe Communities, which I founded a number of years ago, will be making a presentation at the Hughes Research Laboratory at 6 o'clock. And we're going to be rolling out a massive system, municipal system, which can actually keep these types of wildfires from hitting Malibu. So again, that's on Wednesday, the 27th at 6 p.m. at Hughes Research Laboratories.
Didn't know we were related.
I was just thinking of an email on that. What are the dates of all these events?
I don't know what ability we have to send out a group email, but certainly we're going to post it as best we can. I currently don't have an email server like that.
Operation Recovery is maintaining a large list that if people sign up, they will send out blast emails.
Blast emails. Okay, so we will post it, and then Bruce does a great job of grabbing good information and blasting it way further. So does Jane at the Democratic Club, so,
I think the city will be also
the city will be.
making every effort to make people aware of those two meetings.
You can go to the city's website and sign up to get emails, text alerts, reverse 911s. Sometimes I get like 6 and 7 in a row.
Okay, I'm just gonna say this. If you have not signed up for city alerts, please do so. I know, Margaret. Please sign up for city alerts. You can get them by email, you can get them by text, it's your choice. And if you go to that alert section on the city website, you can be alerted. If you wanna go to all of the Parks and Rec Commission meetings, you can get those alerts. If you want alerts about your specific neighborhood, you can get those. Alerts, obviously, emergency alerts. You could really get a lot of alerts if you wanted to. There's all kinds of categories. So please pick the ones that you feel are important.
And I have heard complaints after the fire about too many alerts. I'm raising my hand on that. It's what I help companies with is communication, and I have been very direct with the city about communicating much more frequently, much more often, even without current information, because the absence of communication, we don't fill in the blanks positively. Nobody does. So if you get too many and you're annoyed, call me and you can yell at me, and I'm going to say, deal with it. I don't know what else. Better too much than too little. I'm a big believer in that. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. Appreciate it very much.